since we talked to you last, the temperature did not go up. That's not one of the things. But, and I promise, Jimmy, Eddie, I promise I'm not going to sit here and talk about the cold weather today. But I hate it. And I think when you get older, you're more sensitive to it, for what that's worth.
We're going to have one of those lower thirds on the YouTube chat with you being certified by the National Weather Service if you talk about it anymore, to be honest with you.
Well, here's the thing. Eddie and I were just talking about this. I guess I think it's tomorrow. It's supposed to get up into the mid-20s, and then I think by Sunday, like 40 degrees. It will feel like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
25, it's normal. Yeah, great. Wear a jacket. But the big news that happened yesterday, and we will get quickly here into Notre Dame and Ohio State, but right after we got off the air yesterday, once John was on, the word came out that the Colts have a defensive coordinator, and a guy that, Jimmy, a lot of people I think had kind of targeted or assumed was a possibility, not just because it's the closest proximity for the Colts to, maybe they didn't want to pay a lot of moving charges. Is that it?
Could be.
They said, you know what? It's easy. We'll just get another Mayflower truck. It's only got to go 110 miles down the road.
They charge you double by the state line that you cover, so you got to be careful with that.
That's right. Lou Anarumo is the new defensive coordinator. He comes from the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think most people probably know this by now, an extensive coaching career that not only had stops in Miami with the Dolphins, but also with Purdue. He worked for both Joe Tiller and Danny Hope for the Boilermakers from 2004 to 2011. And this is kind of what I know to this point. Oftentimes, and it is interesting when you look at defensive coaches, how many of them began their career on the other side of the ball. He began his coaching career way back in the day as like a running backs coach and then transitioned into the defensive side of things, but primarily a defensive backs coach. That's the role that he had at Purdue. And then became a D coordinator, moving into the NFL and eventually working his way up into defensive coordinator. One of the things that I like, and I don't know this, and we're going to find out because we're going to talk to Ben Baby, who covers the Bengals for ESPN.com, coming up here just about 30 minutes, about 25 minutes from now. But one of the things that I like, I remember Bill Belichick, each time, I think that the Brady era Patriots and the dynasty era Patriots, Belichick was the guy that you felt like, whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I always had it in my mind that even though he had coordinators, the Belichick would go into the lab, basically. I thought of him as almost like this mad scientist, right, with the stereotype of the guy like in a basement somewhere with Bunsen burners and stuff boiling over, and coming up with a game plan, not necessarily that said, this is how I'm going to play defense, or this is how my defense is going to line up, but rather one that adjusted based on who he was going against.
I'm going to take away your favorite thing you love to do,
Correct.
And I'm going to make life difficult for you for all four quarters.
Correct.
And if you can solve that, great. But if you can't, you're in trouble.
And that's what I think befuddled Manning for so long, was you kind of never knew what looks they were going to give you and what it was that they were, the junk that they were going to throw your way. And from what I understand, Anarumo kind of comes with that sort of, not necessarily anything overly flashy, not necessarily a heavy blitz guy, as much as a defensive chameleon, can come up with different looks based on who you were going up against. So they may, load the box if you're taking on Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. They may drop back a little bit, spread things out if you're going against Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence. You get what I'm saying. I think that you have, maybe he doesn't have a defense that is a 9 in any one area, but he is not below a 6.5 or 7 in the multiple different areas or styles that you need to be. At least that's what it seems to me as his calling card coming in. And for the Colts, the one thing that I am again curious about, do the Colts have the personnel to be able to do all of those different things now if, in fact, you have a roster of players that was here basically dependent upon Gus Bradley's scheme, or before that maybe Eberflus's scheme, depending how long they've been here. But do you now – does this change, for example, and this is one of the things Stephen Holder going to join us today as well that I'll ask him, and E.J. Speed, for example, does his value to Indianapolis now increase because he's a guy that does have more range than, say, Zaire Franklin does, for example, and if you have to play different sets and different looks – do we now find out which players defensively the Colts have that have the most versatility?
Yeah, and that's going to be something that Chris Ballard has to have in-depth conversations, and I would assume they're already happening whenever pen goes to paper with Lou Anarumo and what he wants to do with this team. Regardless of who they were going to hire as a defensive coordinator, they were going to have to make changes in the secondary or bring in additional competition or bring in veterans to help work that system. A lot of people, and this is who I wanted from the very beginning, just because his track record in Cincinnati prior to this season and a little bit of last year was impeccable. He turned around a defense that was bottom of the league and was the catalyst on that side of the ball for why they make their run to the Super Bowl. He has shown time and time again, twice against Patrick Mahomes, once against Josh Allen, that he can thwart the very best the league has to offer in a league dominated by quarterbacks with those multi-scheme looks. But what plagued him in Cincinnati, and I'm interested to get perspective from Ben Baby here in a little bit, as you mentioned, who covers the Bengals for ESPN, is personnel decisions the Bengals had to make as they were balancing everything from a salary cap standpoint and having to make adjustments. He was kind of left on an island last year with what the Bengals were willing to do to supply him with weapons. Like, from a personnel standpoint, that was not the same Cincinnati, at least from a secondary standpoint, team they were accustomed to the last couple of seasons. And for the Colts, that's their biggest weakness. So if you're just going to hire Lou Anarumo, and people pointed this out to me yesterday on Twitter of, oh, look at all of last season, look at how much he struggled. Well, yeah, they didn't have a great defense. They didn't have a great personnel group. And they turned it on the back half of the season to give them a chance to get to the playoffs in the first place. So, yes, if you just hire Lou Anarumo blanketly and you do the same old stuff you've been doing for the last 9 years, 8 seasons of, we're going to build through the draft, and we're going to do it organically, and we're going to take an edge rusher in the first round again. It's going to be great. Yeah, you're going to have the same results, and nothing's going to change. If you work with Anarumo and you target guys that fits versatility, to your point about E.J. Speed, but finding those weapons in the secondary, then this works. Then this has the potential to work. But if you just stamp Anarumo in there and say, hey, figure it out, yeah, you're probably going to get more or less the same results that Cincinnati got in the middle of last year and that the Colts had for the entirety of last season under Gus Bradley.
There are, if I'm not mistaken, and I always forget this has changed now, the way that schedules are done, and because it used to be Christmas Day or, whatever. There are how many days per year where there are 0 professional sports that are scheduled to take place? It's the day before the Major League All-Star Game, right? The day after the Major League All-Star Game. And then it used to be like maybe Christmas Eve, but the NFL now plays games occasionally on Christmas Eve or Christmas
Election Day.
Is Election Day one of them?
Yes. There were no sporting events professionally on Election Day, I want to say.
Okay. So,
according to the reliable source of the internet, they say there's generally 2 days in mid-July where there wind up being no professional sports because of what you outlined, MLB All-Star and stuff like that.
And are those the only 2 that there's? And then you said an election day?
I believe so.
Is it just a presidential election day?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
With all of that said, Eddie, if you could please, if you have the breaking news sounder, let's go ahead with the breaking news sounder. This is one of just 6 days in the calendar year that I can best tell where Jimmy is not wearing a shirt and or shoes that relate in some way, shape, or form to his sports fandom.
I appreciate the punchline, but last week I wore a black Puma polo with no sports affiliation. But thank you all 6. The same.
There are 6.
Oh, you did.
You've already burned 2 of them. You got 4 left the rest of the year.
Jimmy, use your ears. We'll begin
the Chiefs spree, I'm assuming tomorrow, right?
Probably, but Thursday I'm thinking about something Paris-themed since the Pacers are over in Paris.
Oui.
So
you have...
I do have a couple French national team jerseys. That's probably where we're going with that.
Kits, right?
Yes.
And then once the Super Bowl's over, then it's the countdown to opening day for pitchers and catchers. So it's Yankee stuff every day, right?
65 days, 66 days, I think, to opening day, and even shorter still till pitchers and catchers report. Man, I can't wait.
Okay. Of course, yesterday Jimmy was wearing his Fighting Irish gear. Let me tell you last night during the national championship game where I thought the game was over. And I was very genuinely curious of who my rooting interest was going to be in the game. Because, it's funny. Occasionally I do how when we do, just for example, if you listen to this show, you know that we do the 2-minute drill.
Yeah.
And the 2-minute drill, we got guys, gals from around the country that we get from different markets to come on. Hey, can you? I do the same thing and I don't remember what they call it. I think they call it Spanning the Globe in Kansas City. I will occasionally do a hit for that, right? And they asked me the other day, they said, can you come on Monday, meaning yesterday? And I said, yeah, sure. And I assumed they wanted to talk about the Colts D coordinator spot or maybe occasionally the last Pacer stuff.
I believe it's Soren Petro out there at 8.
Correct. Soren is who had me on, right? Yep. So I go on, and I felt bad because the first question he asked is, he's like, okay, Marcus Freeman, let's get right now to the contract for Marcus Freeman in terms of, is he the long-term guy? And what is Notre Dame saying about their NIL collective and how much they could – and I understand this assumption in the rest of the country, but I think people think because Notre Dame is in the state of Indianapolis, that like we actively cover Notre Dame and it's like 35 minutes away. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's actually more of the Chicago market that is the daily beat for the Fighting Irish as opposed to here. But it's
like asking somebody in Tallahassee if they know what's going on in Orlando. That's a bit extreme, but you know what I mean? Like it's
right.
You would think, oh, same state, you got it, but
right.
The distance is real.
And so, having said all of that, growing up here, my friends that were fans of Notre Dame were primarily those that are Catholic. Understandably so. I'm not Catholic. I have nothing against Catholicism, but I didn't have the link to it, right, that other people did. And as we know, and especially when you grew up in the era that I did, they are the most polarizing college football program, or were. I don't know about now, but in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, you were on one side or the other when it came to them. And so I was not a Notre Dame fan. Add to the fact now that they play in the ACC schedule, so to speak, so they play Clemson every other year or whatever else. I've never liked them. But I was curious last night because I find Ohio State fans to be so incredibly boorish. What's the term we came up with yesterday?
Oh, it was the
Yabos.
There it is.
Yabos, yeah. A lot of Yabos people that are Ohio State fans. But I was curious who I would find myself rooting for. And I actually said to Shannon, like midway through the fourth quarter, I said, you know what, next year we should go up for a Notre Dame game. Because
nice.
I really do like Marcus Freeman. I do. And I thought, to be fair to Ohio State as well, I thought both programs last night represented themselves extremely well. I just thought it was a well-played, sportsmanlike game, respectful all the way around. And Ohio State players, when I see them interviewed, are very impressive. Having said all of that, here's where I thought the game was over. I thought offensively in the first drive, clearly, that the Fighting Irish offensive line going to the right side routinely with Riley Leonard, they looked on that first drive like they were going to be able to control the trenches offensively. But they did that drive that took like 49 minutes off the clock, that opening drive. They ran 74 plays. And when they scored, and I said this in real time, not after the fact, in real time I said, when they showed Riley Leonard when he scored that touchdown, he looked completely relieved but exhausted. And I mean this as no disrespect to Riley Leonard or Notre Dame at all. But you could tell right then he had a look on his face like, I can't believe I'm going to have to do that 5 more times. Because everybody in the building knew before Ohio State had even taken a play yet how good they were offensively. And Chip Kelly, give him credit, because for a guy that got much maligned in the Michigan game where they inexplicably went and stayed on the ground, he had scripted, I think, his first 15 plays and managed to involve 5 different receivers within like their first drive and a half. And so the ease in which Ohio State was able to score right then, as soon as the combination of Leonard looking exhausted, and I don't mean physically, I mean he looked mentally exhausted in that first drive, and then the ease with which Ohio State was able to just basically go down and score, right then I thought this is over because Ohio State is going to be able to score almost at will. And they credit to Notre Dame, huge credit to Notre Dame for sticking around and not folding up tent and making plays. I mean, obviously the missed field goal hurt them just psychologically, but to keep it there for a while within grasp of a score. Now, I'll tell you what I thought for certain was going to happen. If you recall, and I've only reminded you of this 56 times, when the playoff schedule came out, I think it was might have been after the first round of games, I said, look, it's going to end up being Notre Dame and Ohio State in the national championship game, and Ohio State's going to win by 17 points. It's exactly verbatim what I said. And don't kid yourself. When it was, I believe it was, what did the final score end up being?
34-23.
Okay. So when they scored to make it 31-21 and went for two, I was like, okay, if they don't get this 2-point conversion and then it's 31-21, Ohio State's going to score one more touchdown and win 38-21 and win by 17, and I am going to literally spend 3 hours talking about my Nostradamus prediction. So I was off by a little bit there, but either way, I thought great game, and credit to Ohio State. And, Jimmy, there is no reason to think in college football, there's no dynasties like you get in other sports, but college football, everybody gets – Alabama had a dynasty under Nick Saban, for sure. And then you have kind of a rotation of schools that each had their 3 to 5 year window crack at the bat. You know, Clemson had it. Florida had it before that. It's Ohio State's turn. I mean, when you look at their recruiting, you look at Ryan Day, there's no reason to believe that the Buckeyes that this is not the first of a couple of them over the next handful of years.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have the potential. They're going to have the NIL to do it. Hats off to Ohio State. Last night, over the course of that game, you're feeling great if you're Notre Dame after that first drive, just because there were so many questions about whether or not you were going to be able to win in the trenches and bully your way down the field. And they did. But as you mentioned, it took a ton out of Riley Leonard. He, per reporters, threw up on the sideline after that drive because of how exhausted he was. And the key to give them any chance, and history never remembers second place. This is going to get forgotten about to sands of time. But my biggest fear throughout this entire run was at some point, with how decimated they were defensively, losing 2 All-American cornerbacks, losing their best sack generator, it was going to come back to bite them. They couldn't generate stops. Like, that second quarter can't happen for Notre Dame. You can't give up 21 unanswered with how your roster is built and have any chance of Notre Dame dominance and excellence and 11-time national champions and all the Heisman winners and just the pageantry of it. And you saw them get on the biggest stage multiple times for the 2000s and get their teeth kicked in and get embarrassed and get pointed out by everybody that they don't belong, that they're a has-been independent that needs to join a conference and that has no business playing with the big boys. And that was incredibly true even when they lost 12 years ago in the national championship game against Alabama, where you knew they had no business being on the same field against the Tide. And you felt that against Clemson, and you felt that in their previous college football playoffs. You didn't feel that this year. It feels different with Marcus Freeman. And yeah, that's me being glass half full guy, but like, you're right, Jake. After that first drive and how much it took out of them, you could sit there and say, man, Ohio State scored with ease, and especially at halftime, being down 21-7 and they score right out of the gate to start the third. This thing's over. Pack it in. They didn't. They fought back. They bounced back. And if they could have made a stop or two, which was the biggest flaw of them and what all of the losers to Ohio State have said all year, oh, man, if we could have just made one stop, you get a chance with 2 minutes to go to try to get down the field and maybe tie that game up. So I don't think Notre Dame is anything to be ashamed of. Not that like the hater aspect of it really ever bothered me, because that's just what the noise is of social media. But anybody that has the take today, and I've seen it from a couple places, even here locally, that Notre Dame embarrassed themselves last night or they didn't belong, you didn't watch the game. Maybe you turned it off at halftime and said it was over. Credit to Riley Leonard. Credit to Marcus Freeman. Jaden Greathouse comes on last night You could point out to a couple of issues maybe if you want to get into the semantics of should they have kicked the field goal? Why didn't they run Jeremiah Love as much? He was still, A, clearly still favoring that knee, and B, they were at a point where they couldn't afford to run the ball 3 plays and be 3 and out like they did in that second quarter when it fell through. I thought given the circumstances, Riley Leonard showed a ton of resolve. They did enough offensively to stay in that game and did make a couple of stops, forcing that fumble, but then you have the missed field goal on Mitch Jeter. They have nothing to be ashamed of yesterday, and I can say this confidently, and I think most Notre Dame fans can too. This is the first time after a loss in my lifetime where I feel more confident about the state of the program moving forward than I did before the season started, and that's a credit to Marcus Freeman.
I will tell you this, as somebody who's a Clemson fan, okay? When Clemson got to their first national title game, now, I mean, I say first. I mean, obviously they went back in 81, but like when of this era, okay, when they went to the title game
with
and
Dabo.
Lost to Alabama.
Yeah,
okay,
with Dabo, this era,
with Dabo.
right? Yeah.
That first one, you are correct. After the fact, with the first one, I was like, because Alabama came out and they did an onside, and then they also they threw a tight end slant. You know, I still remember it all, right? And yet Clemson hung around. It was very similar to last night's game. So after that game, the next day, it was a moral victory, right? It was like, you know what?
Yeah.
Man, I'm proud of this team. Whoever would have thought they'd have been there. Then you get greedy, right? And then, so I hate to say it this way, Jimmy, now you've had your moral victory pass,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
The next time it's like, okay, now you got to get it done. But
I have more faith in
totally agree.
in him than I
get it.
ever did in the Brian Kelly years. Like,
Right.
after that loss, it's like
they earned to get there
correct.
as opposed to
being
the
handed
old
a
system.
BCS
Right.
berth.
Now,
Yeah.
the other thing that I noticed about the game yesterday, and I don't know if you stuck around, and I would understand if you did not. I would understand,
if it was post-game,
especially.
I did not. No.
Okay, Jack Sawyer, right?
Mainly because of Ryan Day. I just don't like him.
He is the ultimate bromanzi, right? Jack Sawyer. After the game, though, when he was being interviewed, somebody needed to tell him to blow his nose. And the camera was right up his nose. Did you notice that, Eddie?
I thought it was just like a huge patch of nose hairs at first.
I thought maybe that he had I thought it was a scar at first. I was like, I don't want to say anything because if he had like some sort of a medical ailment or something. And then I looked certainly on the Expos Twitter and I'm like, yeah, okay. Everybody else noticed it too. And it was, I think last night Jack Sawyer Booger was actually trending. The best was I had no idea Booger McFarland also played for Ohio State.
Great.
Which was solid, right?
That's great.
But either way, look, I've got good friends that are Ohio State fans, right? And some of the people I know that are Ohio State fans, like I have a friend who's an Ohio State fan who's gone through a really, really, really challenging year and a very difficult time. And last night gave resolve for that friend to have something to cheer about.
That's
and
awesome.
Something to look good about. And so, you know what? In that regard, kudos. And I will say, as much as it pains me to say it because I'm not a fan of them, those helmets are sweet. There's no doubt about it. The uniforms of Ohio. Now, I thought it was interesting that Ohio State in the Gatorade splash went with the green Gatorade, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're playing Notre Dame. Why are you drinking green Gatorade? Shouldn't Ohio State have gotten the punch flavor, the red
I would agree
Gatorade?
with you on that. Yeah.
But it was a green Gatorade bath. All right, we're going to go down to Cincinnati. We're going to drive. We're not going to fly down to Cincinnati. And we're going to talk to Ben Baby, who covers the Bengals for ESPN.com. He will give us the lowdown on what the Colts defense may look like. Stephen Holder on the program today as well, and we might catch up with Scott Agnes. He is over in Paris where the Pacers are. We'll let you know what their schedule is because they got all kinds of fun stuff going on this pretty exciting edition, fun edition, and eclectic edition of Query and Company on a Tuesday here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. It's as if we're in the jungle right now, right? Speaking of the jungle, by the way, IU Indy men's basketball Saturday at 2 o'clock. It is retro night.
Ooh.
You can get Metro's T-shirts and posters at their game coming up 2 o'clock in the jungle over on the IU Indy campus this coming Saturday.
You got any of those already in your wardrobe?
I do have a Metro's T-shirt, yes, which is what they were before. In the coach level era, they were the Metros, of course. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is the Bengals beat writer for ESPN.com. Ben Baby joins us to talk about. Now, Ben, I'm going to be honest, and I want you to tell me whether or not I'm in elite company here or this is something that was common in Cincinnati. 150 times over the next year, I'm going to call it both Anarumo and Anarumo. I'm going to screw it up both ways. Do we know definitively which way it is, or is this tomato?
I've always thought it was Anarumo. I have never heard it said the other way, so I would think Anarumo is the way to go.
Okay, so I'm going to have to lock that in because I have this weird thing about some names for whatever reason. It's like a glitch. But let's get to the most importantly here. The style of defense that Indianapolis Colts fans now need to become accustomed to is what?
I think it's one that's going to be flexible and it's going to be game plan specific. When you look at what he did well in Cincinnati, he did a really good job of understanding that each matchup is unique and you've got to be able to blend what you do schematically to what is going to fit whatever that opponent may need to be. So whether it be the Ravens, Kansas City, different opponents that they knew were going to need a certain game plan. Lou did a good job of tinkering with the scheme in order to get the best out of that defense for that matchup. So I think that's definitely going to be a staple of his moving forward.
By the way, Ben, and we love it. Trust me. So this is not an issue at all. I love it. What's the doggie's name?
Rocco. He apparently is an Australian Shepherd who wants to bark at my 11-month-old son right now.
Did you say Rocco? Rocco?
Rocco, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Well, don't let Rocco out. It's too cold out, all right? Let Rocco know. This is not Australia for crying out loud, right? Ben, this particular – and I think this is something that Colts fans are going to be excited about, the ability – to have a flexible style defense. In other words, like you mentioned, a game plan based upon opponent defense. Because of the personnel that Indianapolis currently has, we would assume that they are more pigeonholed. How much will Anarumo have in terms of, or how much did he have in Cincinnati, I should say, and is he accustomed to having personnel say in what players he is going to bring in or try to influence Chris Ballard to have?
Yeah, I think that's something that he definitely had an idea on the types of players that he wanted. And there was good collaboration between the front office and the coaching staff in terms of who he wanted to, the types of players to bring in. They had communication issues last year. They brought Von Bell back as a strong safety. It ultimately didn't work out as well as they thought it would, but I think that's an example of maybe something that they thought would help that defense along. In terms of personnel, I think that he's always been maybe creative in how he views his shell of a 3-4. When he got here, he viewed Carlos Dunlap and Sam Hubbard as your kind of edge players in that 3-4 scheme. And has really done a lot of unique things over time. I don't think many others would have done similarly what they did with Carlos and Sam. And I think they were Sam was more flexible to it. Carlos was eventually traded. So I think it's going to be curious to see how he's going to get all those pieces together. But regardless, finding – and I think I've told you all this before, like the last time I was on with you all, Chris Ballard, I think the bigger question is he's got to go get better players on that roster. I think when you look at when Anarumo was successful here, he had the likes of Jesse Bates and DJ Reader and a scheme that really fit them or players that really fit his scheme. And I think the lack of external free agents was something that was a talking point around the league going into last season. And I think that will continue to be the case if the roster isn't improved and you don't give Anarumo and Shane Steichen the best players to work with.
Ben Baby is our guest, covers the Bengals for ESPN.com. Ben, that's what I said in our opening segment was if you just place Anarumo here and don't upgrade the roster, you're going to get similar results to what you had with Bradley and what the Bengals dealt with for most of the middle to beginning portion of last season. When you look at their struggles the last 2 years, how much of that do you attribute to the fault of Anarumo and how much of it is just the personnel and the balancing they had to make and the sacrifice they had to make balancing their salary cap?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think losing Jesse Bates was huge, and losing DJ Reader, two guys that really were the core of this defense and really were vocal leaders, had really understood the scheme. And I think that having Jesse was the bigger blow because Lou had so much trust in Jesse to play single high coverage. He was able to manipulate a lot of the underneath 10 players and really disguise a lot of looks, really earned his nickname, the mad scientist, that Eli Apple gave him in that 22 playoff run. And not having a true free safety, that Jesse Bates decision has triggered a lot of situations moving forward in terms of how they built that roster. And then I thought last year, I think they had players for a better unit, and eventually they shifted from more of a zone look to more man and match coverages. And we saw that at the back half of the season, that was definitely the better move. We saw players playing with more confidence. It wasn't as complex. The fact that it was simplified allowed guys to play faster. I think had that happened earlier, the Bengals probably would have had a better season, and maybe we're not talking about Lou Anarumo somewhere else. But so I think that there is a little bit of both, and I think that growth, and I wonder how this experience will fuel him in this next chapter of his journey in Indianapolis.
We know it has to be versatility, but what positions are most important to have solidified with talent in a Lou Anarumo-led defense?
Yeah, I think that you need to have really good secondary coverage. I think it's really hard to, he's a DB's guy by trade. He needs to have corners and safeties who kind of understand what he's looking to do. And again, it is a complex, it's not an easy defense to pick up. He does want to make sure that he disguises a lot of stuff pre-snap and post-snap, which, is common. I think he has understood for many years now that and we've seen some defensive coordinators not really adapt to this, but if you don't change the picture on quarterbacks over the course of a game or even in the middle of a snap, in the middle of a sequence, these guys are now too good. They're going to pick you apart. And so that's going to require defenders who really understand the game, who are committed to being in the playbook, operating at that high of a level. That's going to be paramount. We've also got to find a way to get pass rush. I think last year, one of the issues in Cincinnati, along with maybe the young players that they drafted not developing as well as they should have, and you could point the finger in a lot of different areas as to why that was maybe the case, but you did not see a marriage of the pass rush and pass coverage until the end of the year, and I think that's going to be critical. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter who your coordinator is, you cannot run a good defense.
Ben, Ben Baby is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line from ESPN.com in Cincinnati. How big a dog is Rocco? Like a medium-sized dog?
He's got more bark than he looks. He's like 30 pounds. He thinks he weighs about 60. He does run a good. I want to take him with me to the combine this year, see what he looks like in the 40. I imagine he runs a great 40, great shuttle. So we'll see how that agility looks. I would put a first-round draft grade on him. If we would have
How old a fella is Rocco?
He's about 4, so we're almost at the end of his rookie deal. We picked up his 5th-year option. We like it for now. If he continues to bark during these hits, though, we might have to look at some situations for him.
Does he know that he's gotten the new contract? He's probably celebrating, right? I like that.
Yeah, he's not acting like it, so we got to make sure that he understands the stakes here as he moves forward.
I love it. All right, Ben, we appreciate the time, and we'll let you get back to Rocco. And you said an 11-month-old son, is that right?
Yes, our son Booker, who's crawling around, wondering when I'm going to give him the rest of his lunch, and then when Rocco will stop barking at him.
That's excellent.
I'm playing zone coverage out here, so we'll see how much Lou plays in Indy, but I think that's going to be a great fit for the Colts moving forward. It's
baby squared. Baby, right? All right, Ben, we appreciate it very much, man.
Okay, thank y'all.
All right, Ben Baby, who apparently y'all is big in Cincinnati.
I've always wanted to do that with Judge.
Say y'all?
No, with my dog, Judge is just incredibly quick, especially if you throw a tennis ball. So admittedly, I get it, I'd be cheating a bit there, but just take him to high school, get out there 40 yards and just see what we're looking at. See if it's a first round grade like Ben Baby gives to Rocco.
Wait, what kind of dog again is
Judge? Is a miniature golden doodle. But to give you a little context here, this is admittedly kind of weird. Every time we take him to the vet, he is mesmerized by the core calf strength of his back legs that Judge has. And additionally, we've been asking the vet, hey, when's Judge going to start calming down? And, about 4 years ago, Judge is 7 now, mind you. He's like, probably when he's about 5. We took him for a checkup in December. What do you think? You think we're close? Probably 10. Probably 10 years old is when he'll start to lose some of that energy. So he's 7 going on 2.
So you said he's a golden doodle?
Yeah, he's one of those doodles. He's a miniature, but yeah, he's one of those doodles. They're wild.
We have a golden retriever,
Mm-hmm.
fairly certain does meth. Disappears in the backyard for a little bit and then comes back in, and it is like zoomy time and full out bonkers.
I'm with you
I'm
on
going to put Rocco up against my dog, Joey.
Joey's a quick guy?
Yeah, he's an Australian blue heeler cattle dog.
Ooh.
Is that like Bluey? What's Bluey?
Bluey's a blue heeler, yeah.
It's a what?
Blue heeler.
So same?
Kind of.
And
he's not mixed.
So what's the Australian Shepherd? Are they not the blue fellas? I thought they're blue also.
They can be white.
That's what Rocco is, right? He said.
Ben
Rocco,
Baby's dog, yes.
Yes. Then
Yeah.
Rocco's an Australian Shepherd. Okay.
Yeah, those are typically like white, brown, black. Like that color, that tricolor.
Bluey's an Australian cattle dog, also known as a blue heeler, as we mentioned. There you go.
Australian cattle dog. That's
Also
different.
known as a blue heeler is what the
Right.
entry says. I don't know.
Yes. That's why
Not
his
up on
name
my dog
is
breeds.
Bluey.
Bluey!
Pat Knight had when we were in college, had an Australian blue heeler named Nails because Pat went through a period where he thought Lenny Dykstra was awesome.
Chance a big Bluey guy, Jimmy?
Not there yet, but I'm sure he will be. Big at the dancing fruit right now. If we ever
Excuse
give
me?
him any screen
Coco,
time. I don't
what is
know,
that?
Man.
Is that Coco Lemon?
It's not Coco Melon. This is
Okay.
just generic fruit dancing on YouTube. It's all whole thing.
What about
But
the Wiggles?
not a ton of screen time. I
Are they the
think
fellas
Yes.
that sing all the time?
Yes. Where's Jeff? Yeah,
The
those
fruit
dudes.
salad
Yep.
song?
Yeah. Yes.
Fruit salad.
Yes.
You know that song.
Yummy.
Now, Eddie, how do you know this?
The Wiggles?
Yeah.
I grew up watching The Wiggles.
Oh boy, I've never felt older in my life. What about Baby Einstein? Did you watch that?
No.
Know of them, but
That's
no,
a
never
parent.
watched them.
Really?
Stephen Holder, by the way, just about 18 minutes. So what do the kids call it? Is it called FOMO?
Yeah.
Fear of missing out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of FOMO. Not fear of missing out, but there's a jealousy for sure.
You're disappointed that you don't get to be like the Australians and go anywhere in America in the blink of an eye and then go back to Australia?
By the way,
fine?
The Australians just texted me, wanting to know what there is to do in Washington, D.C. And I'm like, well, if you're there right now, there's a lot to do.
I mean, well, yes,
but it's a little chilly, right?
But if it was a normal year, with no inauguration, having finished yesterday, gosh, so many museums. Just so many museums.
Totally.
You don't have to go to the monuments if you just want to, if you're a museum buff like me, so many.
But I wondered about this, Jimmy, and I do understand that, and this is a hard thing to grasp, but, because I'm like, oh, man, like, you've got to go down to the mall area, and then you have to I had to clarify it. I don't mean mall like our Circle Center mall,
right,
like where there's, 2 stores left, but the mall from the Capitol, people here know what the mall is in D.C. So then I was saying to them, I'm like, you have so many, the Washington Monument's awesome, the Vietnam Wall, the Korean War, but all of that is tied to American history.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that as Australians they can't appreciate that, but it's not stuff that they grew up knowing the history of all of it. So there would be a great, like if you were when you go to London, I mean, yes, we have a fascination with Parliament and that kind of thing,
sure,
but like just the overall historical aspect of it, I guess England's kind of ties to here, but
that's why you go the Smithsonian route. Go see the Museum of Natural History, the Aerospace Museum, or the Museum of African American History, or the Holocaust Museum. I mean, there's I get your point, because there's certain aspects of DC that are regionalized to the point that you don't get that level of patriotism. But if you go the museum route, then you're going more global.
But at any rate, the FOMO that I have right now is not that as much as the people that are over in Paris. Now, my understanding is that the Pacers themselves, Rick Carlisle joined the guys this morning on the wake-up call, but I think the Pacers had a number of activities that they're doing. Their game will be Thursday, taking on the Spurs over there, for the obvious reason of why they'd be playing the Spurs in Paris, at Wembanyama. They have 2 games. Each is considered a home game for the other. So San Antonio will not be coming to the Fieldhouse this year. But just in corresponding with people that are over there and flew over, many of them left last night, and the things that there are to do over there, kind of to your point, even though I am not French, going and seeing Napoleon's tomb was awesome. Going to the Louvre was amazing. I mean, and I don't know, this is a really, I'm embarrassed to ask it question. What is the weather in Paris
just
this
looked
time
it up,
of year?
Because I thought that same thing.
Okay, let me get now, Fahrenheit or Celsius? We're going Fahrenheit here.
We're going
right?
Fahrenheit, yeah, because we are,
okay,
that's how we roll here in the U.S.
So I'm going to say right now it is 34 degrees in Paris.
Right on the money, Jake.
Well are you serious?
Right on the money. 34 degrees currently in Paris, France.
Holy cow.
You should go buy a lottery ticket.
96% humidity. Some showers expected tomorrow, Friday, and Saturday.
So that's not exactly great weather, but
no, it's not. I mean, I've only been over there, admittedly, in the summertime, and it was pretty hot mid-July. But I mean, that's just this time of year, right? You're dealing with the cold. You're dealing with the yuck.
I was there in late October, and it was just like here. I mean, it was great. It was basically like here.
Yeah.
But man, it's a pretty magical place, right?
It's awesome. Should be on your European bucket list if you're ever going to travel around there across the pond.
The game itself, I talked about this yesterday, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I do think that it is the kind of trip that if your team is struggling or just finding its way, then it's a really good thing because it just allows guys to kind of bond together. But this particular group of Pacer players, this particular roster, and obviously every franchise in America, every sports franchise in North America, the Winnipeg Jets, the Arizona Diamondbacks, the Washington Wizards, the Buffalo Bills, every franchise says, well, we got good guys in this locker room. I mean, we went out and, because we look at character. I mean, character matters at this When we go through and we scout these players, I mean, the first thing we look at is, we do our background. We like character.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody says that, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't always happen that way. And this particular group, probably as much as any team that we've seen representing Indianapolis, be it Colts, Pacers, Indians, whatever it might be, Fuel, this particular group of players on this Pacers roster, you've got to give Chad Buchanan, Ryan Carr, Kevin Pritchard a lot of credit because they have gone out, and I think that some of this is just luck of the draw. I mean, you can try your hardest to determine how players are going to mesh in personality-wise, and yet you still don't know oftentimes until they are there. Now, part of that may be Halliburton, because when Halliburton was brought in, one of the things that I think the Pacers were blown away by was how he had this infectious personality in a good way, positivity about himself, right? Maybe that changed a little bit, but I still think for the most part it's there, and it's a cohesiveness that comes off of that. And then, Matherin is the one guy that I think there probably was some question just in terms of his personality, how he meshed. But he has really done a good job this year of understanding his role and embracing it. And you just see the little things and it's little things. When they go out west now for the second straight year, when they've gone out to play Phoenix and they've deviated and gone to Tucson to see Ben Matherin get honored a year ago, or T.J. McConnell get honored this year, or, the different Enrique Freeman. I mean, I'm pretty sure they went back to his high school when his high school jersey was retired and the whole team shows up. Those things matter. I mean, those little things matter. And sometimes you can get a couple of guys that are kicking and screaming about it, or you can tell they just don't want to be there and whatever else. It just doesn't feel that way. And, I'm not trying to carry water for them, but it hasn't always been this way with this franchise, obviously, right? I mean, it goes without saying. There have been times, well documented, where they took risk of character flaw, thinking that the locker room itself could change guys in that regard. And I think Chris Ballard has played with that a little bit and got burnt by it. I mean, Ballard, by his own admission, has said, if you have a good locker room and a good culture, that can overcome a guy or two that then figure out they got to get in line. Well, sometimes that guy or two becomes alpha enough that it backfires on you. Doesn't feel like the case with this group.
It's taken them 8 years since the Paul George trade to be able to get back to a point, I guess 6 years because you've seen it the last 2 seasons, but it's taken them that amount of time with a lot of different roster building looks and different franchise pieces or hopeful franchise pieces to be in this position that they're at, where you can look at a stretch of play as bad as it was to start the year and have that turnaround and be very confident in every piece in that locker room. I do want to, though, later today, you brought up something about Notre Dame and what just happened last night that I want your perspective on. Did it already happen with the Pacers? And are there undertones there from the fan base? I want to get into that a little later today.
Stephen Holder going to join us just a couple of minutes from now. We'll get more into the Colts defensive coordinator search coming to an end. By the way, thank you to those, and feel free, since we were talking about Rocco and you were talking about Judge and
Joey,
Eddie threw in Joey,
yep.
and then Kobe, like I said, we think is on meth. Somebody sent me this. Here's Phil, a 50-pound mini Bernedoodle.
Yep.
Yeah. Similar to a Golden Doodle.
Yes.
Incredible straight line speed, excellent speed through the turns, outstanding vertical. His cone drill would not be high because he'd eat the cone like he eats mulch.
Same for Judge.
Says, but he has very good bend. And then a photo of Phil, who's a good-looking fella, right? So if you'd like to send me a picture of your dog and your expectation of how the dog would do in the combine, I'm all about it. I'm all about it if you want to send me that text. Stephen Holder, I'm not sure if he has a dog or not, but he joins us next here on Query & Company. Eddie Garrison pulling the heartstrings here, getting me ready on this frigid day for July. July 10th and 11th, when I'll be in Manchester taking my chances that Oasis will still be together 3 concerts into their reunion tour, right?
Is there an over-under set there?
I mean,
2.5.
Can you imagine? Well, at least I'll get a trip over to Liverpool and take a tour of the Beatles stuff. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that introduction on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. He is the Colts beat writer for ESPN.com. We heard the Cincinnati side of things from his colleague Ben Baby about what the Colts might be getting here in Lou. You want to say it for me, Jimmy?
Anarumo.
I'm still going to say Anarumo. I don't know why. Steven, in the next 20 times I mention his name, I'll get Anarumo screwed up and say Anarumo. It's like this weird hurdle that I have. But
just put ANN and then Rumo.
No, it's just so. Here's what I want to know, Steven. We talked to Ben, and he was saying that this is basically, I'll call it a chameleon scheme. And what I mean by that is it changes depending on, what he wants to bring in terms of a style of play for his defense is dependent upon who you are facing and what you need to come up with out of the lab. Is that good news or bad news for the personnel that the Colts currently have defensively? Do they have players that can play a variety of different ways?
Yeah, I do think that, and I'm guilty of this too, to a degree, I do think that we sometimes go a little overboard in characterizing how players fit in a certain scheme. Now, there are some where there would be probably more turnover in terms of the types of players. I don't think that's the case here. Now, it will be very different, though. Just because similar players can play the scheme doesn't mean the scheme is similar, okay? So what Ben described in terms of it being more of a game plan, week-to-week approach, I mean, that's kind of the Belichick approach, like philosophically, which was we're going to adapt to what that offense does and go attack their strengths. So what the Colts have done under both Matt Eberflus for, 4 years, and then the last several years under Gus Bradley as defensive coordinator, what they have emphasized is, frankly, just being very static and saying to the players, okay, we're going to do just a handful of things. We're not going to get too complex, but we're just going to do those things and do them really, really well. And even if they're predictable, it's still going to make for small throwing lanes and will make it hard in the defense. That can work philosophically, but it has not had success in the last couple of years. So this is going to be the complete opposite of that. And I think if you ask me if that's a good thing, I would say in light of what happened with the last scheme, yes.
If you had to guess, Steven, what defender on the Colts roster would you say has the most flexibility? And I don't mean like they do yoga. You know what I mean by that? Sure. Seemingly they have the most versatility as a player.
Yeah, well, Kenny Moore comes to mind. Now, he has limitations because of his size, though, so that somewhat offsets his flexibility, but he can do a lot of different things. Like, for example, and I touched base with Kenny yesterday. He's actually very happy about this. He thinks this is going to be good for him. So he was actually quite excited. So he's in. And I think that says a lot. He's one of the smartest football guys on that roster. Knows the game, studies the game. So if he says I think this can work for me and for us, then I take a lot of stock in that. That's the first thing. But anyway, Kenny is just a versatile player, right? He can play certainly coverage on big guys, small guys. He can rush. He can tackle very well. You can use him in myriad ways. And I think there was some disappointment on Kenny's part when Matt Eberflus left here. He didn't say it, but I thought it was pretty obvious. He was used in, I think, less ways, in fewer ways, when Matt Eberflus left. And I think he saw that as a downgrade to a degree. Now, he adapted, and he ended up playing well in Gus Bradley's scheme, but he liked being called upon to do different things, like even blitz the quarterback at times. In the rare times that Matt Eberflus would blitz. So those opportunities are going to be more plentiful in this scheme. And I think a guy like that, he becomes a Swiss Army knife. So I think he's very interesting in this system. Latu, I think, is interesting in this system just with his athletic ability. That gives you a huge menu of things. So I actually think there's reason to be encouraged about new eyes and a new system with these players to see if they can get more out of them.
Stephen Holder is our guest, covers the Colts for ESPN.com. He's with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, Anarumo is who I wanted from the beginning because of his track record and what he's been able to do as a defensive coordinator, the catalyst to the Bengals' run to the Super Bowl a couple years ago. But I think it fell off, and Ben Baby said this is mostly true because of the personnel sacrifices they had to make based on cap constraints, just where things were headed. I think they got this hire right, but if you set it and forget it and stay with your drafting young and developing that way they've been doing for the past 8 years, I don't think it works. How committed is Chris Ballard in your mind now that he has a DC that can give multi-looks to upgrading key areas, one of which, as Ben Baby mentioned, in free agency, would be a cornerback room that needs more bodies of versatility for his system to be able to thrive?
Yeah, no, you outlined it perfectly. I mean, they got to walk and chew gum at the same time. And by that, I mean the two things being make this move. So the coaching move is walking, and then the chewing gum part, I guess, to continue the analogy, would be also making the requisite roster moves that you need to make. They needed to make the moves anyway. Okay? If the man in the moon was going to be the defense coordinator, you probably needed to make some moves in the secondary. So, I don't even think they're necessarily related. They should be independent of each other. Like, we're changing defense coordinators and we don't have enough talent in the secondary. Like, those two things are almost unrelated in my mind. I mean, they're linked in that one depends on the other. But my point is, both those things needed to happen independent of each other, is what I say.
How much do you think, in a league and a conference especially, that I think has the best quarterbacks in the league itself? The AFC is a powerhouse for QBs. Right. He has shown why he got the nickname the Mad Scientist. He can thwart the likes of Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. How much of that, if the Colts do internally believe that, that they want to be a real player in the AFC, does that aspect of his resume, or did that aspect of his resume factor into the hire?
I think a lot, because the guy who drove this hire, the fans may be happy to hear, was Shane Steichen. And the reason that matters is because I think your defensive coordinator and your offensive play, or at least your head coach, they should be philosophically in tune with each other. And I don't know what that was or wasn't the case with Gus Bradley. I'm not saying it was or it wasn't. I don't know. But it certainly wasn't Shane Steichen's hire. Okay? So here, what this tells me, my assumption, what I take away from this is that for Shane, it's very important that they take a different approach philosophically on defense, and that is to go attack teams' weaknesses and find a way to win. A lot of great coaches, they will always tell you there's always a way to win a game, and that's why we see upsets, because there is a way. You've got to figure it out. And so what Lou Anarumo has figured out over the years at times is that he didn't necessarily care what the stats said, but his goal was, look, we're going to go and find a way to win the game and find a method or of attack or whatever it might be. We're going to find a way. And I think that should be the focus. And that, again, if you talk to people like Rick Venturi, for example, who was with Bill Belichick 35 years ago in Cleveland, and that was their entire philosophy. And it was in New England as well. It was, look, I don't know what we did last week, but this week, this is what the hell we're doing. And that was very successful for a long time.
Stephen Holder is our guest, ESPN.com, where you can read his work, Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, where you currently hear his voice, along with whatever listening device you're on. Stephen, we have talked to you, obviously, and broken down and dissected the Chris Ballard end-of-year press conference. But now that the dust has kind of settled on that and we begin transitioning into what next year is going to look like, how is Chris Ballard different from the beginning of the year press conference? Is there anything about him, be it his approach, be it his humility, whatever it might be, was there anything that you saw as like just a growth or a change at all in the guy that's calling the shots for the Colts?
Yeah, now I may have said this before, but I think it bears repeating. I think the big thing for me is Now, Chris Ballard has, in the past, at the end of the season, he has said on multiple occasions, I failed. Okay, I screwed up. I should have did this or should have did that. Like, everybody kind of rolled their eyes at that to a degree. And I get it because you heard it before, right? Where it was different this time is I screwed up and now I have to do something different. And not just like I need to get some players. It's more like philosophically, because I asked him point blank, the second question in the press conference, the first question was Mike Chappell on Anthony Richardson. The very next question, I asked him, did you go too far and were you too rigid in your philosophy? His answer, yes. And then I said, now what? And he proceeded to say how he's got to be more open-minded and that he will be more flexible and not have such tunnel vision with his philosophy. And so how is that a change? It's a big change because if you go back to the preseason, you asked me about his beginning of year press conference. That was the press conference in which he said, this is what we believe. And if it gets me fired, so be it. Well, it almost got his butt fired. Okay. And so maybe that's what did it. But the point is, he definitely sang a very different tune. And I don't think it was just, hey, I screwed up. I think this was more, okay, we are going to change course. We'll see, though.
Do you think, in all honesty, how close do you think Chris Ballard really was to getting fired?
That I don't know. That's a great question. I don't think he was that close, not as much as people think, because from everything that I have been able to glean here, Jim Irsay had his mind made up that he was going to let some things play out here, whether it was, the quarterback another year, Shane Steichen a third year. I think everybody is. No one has said this outright, but it's very clear to me. I think at this point, everybody's kind of handcuffed together here, right? Joined at the hip, whatever term you want to use. They're all in this together. They're all in the same bucket. And if you empty the bucket, they're all getting emptied out, in my opinion. Okay? So that's where they're at. This was not a good time for a shakeup at quarterback. You probably don't know enough about your head coach to say we're moving on. And so I just think the timing in Jim Irsay's mind wasn't right. And his mind was made up. Now, whether Chris Ballard knew that is a different question. I can't tell you that, but that's my sense on it. I would say this: people around the league who I talked to, there were many of them, in fact, in a lot of cases, reaching out to me, asking me, including personnel people on other teams, like, hey, what's going on with those guys? Are they coming back? So there was a lot of doubt around the league, and I don't know whether Chris Ballard had the same fare, but certainly – there were a lot of questions from other people around the league, not media. I'm talking about NFL people. So that was interesting.
Colts beat writer for ESPN.com, Stephen Holder with us, Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Stephen, that joining at the hip you mentioned of Richardson, Steichen, and Ballard, we were worried about kind of being a trap door that potential coordinators would want to step over and avoid, because if it's a lame duck type of year for that crew, then you're out on the street looking for a job. I would stand to reason Anarumo at this stage with his resume, he's one of those guys that strikes me as will always find a coordinator job in the NFL, regardless of circumstance. I know I've outlined some of the answer there to lead the witness to some extent, but when you look at that trapdoor aspect that could have scared coordinators away, why do you think that Anarumo looked at it as an actual opportunity rather than something to be fearful of?
Yeah, well, first off is you got to pay him. Okay, and that's the first thing. I don't know what his other opportunities were, but I'm sure that he talked to someone beyond the Colts. You would think, right? I mean, his track record.
I mean, he's a head coaching candidate a year ago, right? Like
exactly. He's very well thought of. His players like him, all that, right? So he has a reputation that is intact around the league. So there's a couple things. Number one, I can tell you when Gus Bradley got hired, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, he got, I think, a 4-year contract. That's pretty good. And so if you're going to give a guy a 4-year contract, and I don't know if that's what happened, but I'm just saying, use that as an example. Let's say they gave Anarumo a 4-year contract at X number of dollars. Even if he gets fired next year, he's in good shape. And I don't know what his contract situation was with Cincinnati, but that's another question. He may have gotten he may have gotten fired with time left on his contract there, which means he has guarantees from Cincinnati. So So the guy ain't hurting. He's doing great, okay, at the bank. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just, look, I mean, I know that the Colts were, I thought, pretty disappointing on defense this year, but the cupboard isn't bare. I would say it's not completely bare. As much as I know this is an unpopular thing to say, they have some pieces on defense. They just got to figure some stuff out. They threw up all over themselves this year. If they can figure some stuff out, you could see some pretty dramatic improvement. And I don't know if he's the guy to do it, but I think if you look at the guys on paper, you would say, okay, this is not a bad start for me. I can work with this. And as long as Chris Ballard gives me what I need, this is a good start.
By the way, Steven, do you have a dog?
I do. She has interrupted the show before, in fact.
I can't remember. What's the dog's name?
That's Kimmy.
Kimmy? Okay. And Kimmy's what kind of dog?
She's a pit mix. She's a runt, though. She's like 35 pounds or something. I'm like, what kind of pit bull are you? I mean, like, her bark is definitely bigger than her size, but I'm like, man, I hope nobody gets past the front door.
How's the 40 time? Good,
yeah, I was going to say, what kind of athlete is Kimmy?
Oh, she can move. She can move now, yeah.
Would you say she can scoot?
She can. She can.
All right.
She would be pretty good in the shuttle run, I think.
Actually, if she's a pit, probably decent bench press as well, right? Because at the combine, as we know, there's that one guy that runs around. He looks like Tony Robbins. He's got like a headset on, and he's screaming and yelling while guys are doing the bench. Kimmy'd be good with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, pit bulls and those breeds in general, they don't feel pain either. Like I haven't tried this, so don't get any ideas. But like, if you were inclined to kick your dog, if you were that type, you better kick the dog hard if it's a pit. That's all I'm saying.
They're very strong.
That was a terrible analogy, wasn't it?
We have PETA on the line now, Steven. Thanks. We're going to have to deal with that the rest of the day. Gosh.
Steven Vick.
By the way, this just in, Eddie. Do you have the breaking news sounder? Do you have the breaking news sounder by chance? Stephen Holder, now the new beat writer for the Atlanta Falcons, by the way. Just so we know.
It just fits. Yeah.
No, all right, Stephen. Appreciate the time as always, and we will watch and see what happens here in terms of the defensive coordinator. I guess the last thing I should ask you real quick is just, do you expect that he will have now a pretty heavy say in what the Colts could do defensively, personnel-wise, and in addition to that, could that alter what the Colts might do with that first-round pick? For example, if there's a tight end there, could they say, no, actually, we need to upgrade defensively because of our new DC?
I mean, it's always possible, but I think the first question, just in terms of the broader question, is just how much impact will he have on what they do from a personnel perspective? I think he'll have a decent-sized impact. I mean, if you look back to history, again, precedent. Gus Bradley comes on board 4 years ago, and what's the first thing the Colts do in the offseason? They go get Yannick Ngakoue from the Las Vegas Raiders because he fit very specifically the type of defensive end that Gus Bradley wanted. Now, he wasn't here long, and that wasn't a long-term solution, but for that in-between period, while they were still drafting players to play the scheme, they said, okay, that's a guy who can do it. I need that guy. They went and got him, right? So that's one example. And there were a couple other players they did the same with under Gus Bradley. So there's precedent for it. And then you combine that allegedly with Chris Ballard saying he'll change, then, I think the odds are good that we'll see some moves in service of Lou Anarumo doing a good job.
When will you get an indication with how long you've been on this beat that Chris Ballard is committed to changing? Is it immediately when free agency starts? Is it the draft? No. When will you get a hint of, okay, he really means what he said at the end of your presser?
I think it would be free agency because, number one, I mean, that's where I think he has had the blind spot, and it's not really the draft, frankly. I mean, I think he drafts fine. If you were grading Chris Ballard just on draft picks, I don't really have a huge problem. I think that the problem is, it's not that he didn't draft well. The problem is that you overvalued some of your draft picks. And just because you drafted him doesn't mean that he's a starter. Maybe he's just a good backup, and that's okay. Go get you a starter, right? Or go get you the good backup if you need one, right? Whatever it is. Fill the holes with free agency. And the damn thing about it, the damnness thing about it, is that Chris Ballard has been pretty good in free agency. That is unquestionable. He's had guys like Danico Autry and Justin Houston, great pickups that they got cheap and played great for this team. My question is, why don't you do it more?
By the way, Kimmy has entered the transfer portal, just so you know. Kimmy has declared free agency.
Listen, she's got it pretty good here, okay?
I'm sure.
She's got it pretty good. So, I mean, our NIL is pretty strong. So
I like that.
Leave it at that.
Fair enough.
You know?
All right, Stephen, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, guys.
All right, Stephen Holder joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. And by the way, I know Stephen really well. And yes, he just so people know, tender-hearted, dog-loving guy. No question. Now, Jimmy, you said you had a question for me in regards to something that we were talking about earlier. We talked about Notre Dame and Ohio State and that game. We'll get back into that conversation about what took place last night in Atlanta. And, Kevin made it into the game, right, Bowen?
He did.
Somebody at halftime, somebody sent me a message that said, did Kevin make it in the stadium? And I replied and said, yes, but I don't know for how much longer.
I believe he got credentialed as a media member because he was in the post-game press conference.
Was he?
Mm-hmm.
I was curious, and I didn't follow along every bit of it during the morning show, but I was curious if he was going to go that route. Because that seemed like the straightest path.
I did know that's what he was. That was
and good
the
for
backup
him.
plan,
Get in the door,
right?
man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I did have a question
so you had
for
a question for me in relation to that relates to the Pacers.
Correct.
As they are. So we are going to do it in conversion. We're not going to do it in French, but we're going to convert last night's game into a question about the Pacers, and we're going to do it on the other side, all right?
Sounds like a plan.
All right, we will do that on the other side here, Query and Company. Scott Agnes may be joining us from Paris coming up in about, 35 minutes or so, Eddie?
Yeah, confirmed I was finally able to touch base.
All right, so it's like 9 o'clock over there, right?
It's 6 hours different, so it's 7:23.
All right, we'll catch him at a cafe. You know my favorite Bruce Springsteen trivia question, right?
Remind me of it.
People can text me their guess at 317-523-9288. You want to send a dog picture, that's cool too, but 317-523-9288, which
Why
is
not
my
both?
cell phone number, right? You send me your guess and a dog picture. The only song Bruce Springsteen wrote that went number one on the Billboard chart.
You have yeses all the time, and every
my
time I'm
favorite
equally
trivia question
fascinated,
about
and then I
Bruce
forget.
Springsteen.
Shows you how much I listen on this show.
People can text me their guess. Okay, so we talked about Notre Dame and Ohio State earlier. And to go back to what we were saying, I thought at the beginning of the game, the Fighting Irish right out of the box it was like, man, they came to play. And you thought, we got a game on our hands. And when they scored that first touchdown, Riley Leonard looked like the weight of the world was taken off of his shoulders. And I mean, none of this is a knock on him at all. It was a remarkable drive by Notre Dame. It was like an 8-minute drive or something like that?
I think it was 10. It was just whatever it was. It was crazy.
It was. And it was methodical. But when he scored, he had a look of his body language of two things. Number one being, man, I'm glad that's over. And then the other being kind of like in Karate Kid when Daniel has to do the fence and gets done, and Mr. Miyagi comes out and says, whole fence. And he looks and sees the fence all the way around, and the look of defeat on Daniel, like, oh my gosh, I've got to still keep doing this. It kind of looked that way. Then Ohio State, with the quickness in which they scored, I just thought right then, I'm like, this psychologically is over. And I'll give Notre Dame credit. I mean, they hung around and they showed great resiliency. But the game was, to me, the game was never in doubt. I mean, once it got up.
They started to get, Ohio State did, a little Ryan Day curl up in a shell. Prior to that 3rd and 11, when they decide to actually air it out to Smith,
right,
it looks like they're just running and bleeding
clock. They were
clock.
playing not to lose at that point, right?
Yes. And then they take the shot, and it's like, okay, yeah.
But they had the ability, you knew, to just to go at any time, right?
It was, if they wanted to choose to play that way, to bleed clock and play not to lose, they could open the door for Notre Dame. But if they chose to go out to one of their weapons and their best weapon in Smith, they could do it at will, and they did. So, yeah, in that regard, never in doubt, but you still had a glimmer of hope late on that 3rd and 11. Maybe you get a stop and go back down. But what I was bringing up was, I came in here today and I told you that as a Notre Dame fan, it's the best feeling I've had for that program in my lifetime. They are able to win 2 bowl games of significance for the first time in 30-plus years, and it looks like a program that belonged on that stage, that earned their way there, didn't get gifted a AP voter spot or a BCS computer spot. They earned their way into the championship game and had a chance late to get a stop, get off the field, and maybe go down and tie the game. And you told me that feeling, which is accurate, is a humble loss feeling that you have one time, and then you get greedy, and then expectations change, and now all of a sudden you want to climb the mountaintop, and getting there or being in the conversation is no longer good enough. And where I bring it back to the Pacers is we're talking about right now how they have great camaraderie, great chemistry. They're on a nice stretch of play after, kind of being flat on their face with injuries and the struggles on the road. And they've turned a corner and are incredible in the 2025 calendar year. But there are rumblings in the fan base of, do they need to make a move at the deadline? Do they need to upgrade the roster? Is this roster good enough to contend in the East? And how I bring the two together, you said last segment or a couple segments ago that last night I had the humble loss for Notre Dame, and now I'm greedy and I want more. Did the Pacers have that last year in the conference finals against the Celtics? And are we in that era right now of, yes, there's all this, and I'm not talking about jobs being on the line. I'm talking about just the fan base being potentially frustrated. Was that grace period last year in the conference finals, or is it different because it wasn't the ultimate stage?
Okay, good question. I think last year was a thrill ride for people because exactly with this group, it all came together, and yeah, there was a little bit of the fact that the East, attrition came into play, right?
Yeah.
But they not only got to the Eastern Conference Finals, and then Halliburton got hurt, I realized, but they
played Boston closer than anybody.
They did. And they were competitive with Boston, right? Mm-hmm. And
some are saying the most competitive sweep of all time.
That's right. And so here's the thing. I think because it's a fan base that has seen multiple eras of exactly that, of going to and knocking on the door, that shortens the amount of the goodwill period before then people are like, I think in this market with this franchise, it's expected a little bit. I don't mean spoiled, but people here have become,
going into
the Paul
this season,
George group, the Reggie group, there have been multiple eras where they have had multiple cracks at trying to get to the finals. So there's an expectation that when you finally catch that thrill ride and you get that high that you saw last year, that then is the entryway to that is now the expectation. So I do think that now people are expecting they're going to make a deep playoff run.
Going into this season, myself, other Pacers fans, I think there was a lot of belief of, the East had attrition and injuries and all that, but this team outlasted, has great pieces around them. Another year of Siakam, another development year for both Bennett Mather and Jarris Walker. Why can't this group be out in the front of the East once again and have an opportunity to go punch ticket to the finals? And then you have that slow start and all the question marks arrive, and you have the injuries, of course, to accompany it as well. But I feel like, and I'm framing this merely as curiosity. I'm not saying if the Pacers lose in the conference semifinals that anybody's job should be at risk. I know the situations could change that. If it was like drastic mismanagement or something, then maybe you have calls for that. But I feel like there was a sense of now is the time to get it done for this team. And I still don't think they're a complete group. Like, I do think they're still a piece away from being an NBA title contender.
Here's the thing. I don't disagree with that, Jimmy, but the area where they are the piece away almost puts them in the hopper with everybody else because everybody's the same piece away.
Yeah.
Other than Boston. Like, Boston has, between Tatum and Brown, they have not one but two of the guys that the rest of the league is looking for, which are guys that can guard on the wing, that can step back, hit a three, etc. Brandon Miller in Charlotte is the perfect player for Indiana. Truthfully, and I don't know about now because he's definitely in the downside, but Paul George, even on like third contract, was the perfect player for this group, right? It's the missing link. But nobody has that player. Very few have it. Let me rephrase that. Teams might have that player, but that's all they have. Very few have a 1-2 combo, and then also
and once they have it,
the stretch,
they're not getting rid of it.
Correct. That's correct.
Like, you look at the idea, you're right. Brandon Miller would be a perfect piece. That's the entirety of the Hornets' future, at least one of their building blocks. Like, they're not.
That's right.
There's not a package I think the Pacers could offer that wouldn't be short-sighted to the point of affecting the Pacers more than it did.
Now, I did see that Paul George recently did a podcast and said that while in Indiana, maybe it was just after here, but I think it was when he was in Indiana, that when his free agency was coming up, that he considered going to Detroit to hook up with, did you see this?
Mm-mm.
Andre Drummond, and I believe Reggie Jackson was the other player he mentioned. Is that right?
That would fit the mold, yeah.
And he thought that would be a big three.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, I don't know about that, man. Like, Paul George is a wonderful player, and I always thought a pretty nice guy, but I also think a little bit of delusion at times as to the overall oomph of Paul George.
Well, and you're saying a lot. Like, don't be wrong, he's been a outstanding pro for what he is, but Andre Drummond is very much the old age big in a big three. Like, he's not the
like
Chris Bosh,
he's
like
the
stretch
NBA's
guy.
Umar
Like, that's
Ballo, right?
Yeah,
like he's huge.
Sure,
but you know what I mean?
he's still going to reliably get you boards and dominate down low. But yeah, I wouldn't have
Drummond
seen
in
that.
his prime was like The closest thing to Shaq.
He was a rebound machine, no question.
Yeah.
The problem is his prime was just really short, right? I mean,
And the NBA just changed so
correct,
fast.
that's the problem.
did,
Like his window of his prime was when the league went, no, we don't do that anymore. We're just gonna go. We're gonna stretch the floor, and you're a dinosaur now.
Same with Jahlil Okafor. Like, he would have been a great
Sure.
big like 15 years ago, but the game literally changed right as he got drafted.
Yep. Anyway, it's an interesting couple of weeks for the Pacers because I don't know if, and it doesn't matter. It's just semantics of what Notre Dame just went through and the comparisons of did Pacers fans have that humble feeling a year ago. But my bigger fascination is they're cap strong. They've started to come on. They found value with Thomas Bryant. I wouldn't be mad at them to see what this group can do fully healthy still in the East. But I think there's room for an upgrade. Deadline's in a couple weeks. Do they believe what I just said, which is now we're good? We like what we have now? Or do they look around at Cleveland and Boston and Orlando and say, that's not a matchup I want without more pieces? And what are they willing to gut to make that upgrade if they do? Because they are limited. Tony East outlined it last week, Jake. Like they have so much to balance up against the cap that stands right now that unless you're going to move a bigger contract, I don't want to see him go, but Miles Turner would be the only piece that wouldn't be a long-term commitment that you've already given out, right? You have Siakam under contract.
Right.
You're not moving him. You just have Halliburton underneath that long contract. You're not moving him. You could move Toppin, but you're going to have to include other core pieces because Toppin by himself, Eddie, you're right.
14.
The math is there for him from a value standpoint for the cap equations to make a trade work, but Toppin himself isn't fetching you a significant piece. You're going to have to combine him with other pieces.
Now, by the way, somebody sent me a picture of Franklin, their dog.
Okay.
Franklin is intently listening to Jake and his breakdown of the national championship game. And there's Franklin's, looks like he's asleep. Now, do you have a dog voice?
Sure.
You know, the Jake Query rule, there's 3 people in this world that you cannot trust. People that don't return their shopping cart. People that don't know how to deboard an airplane in the proper fashion. Like
People who take their shoes off on an airplane?
Well, those people are just, they're not even people.
Okay.
Those are just creatures. And then people that don't have a dog voice. Now, Jimmy, can I hear your dog voice?
Who's a good boy, Judgy? How you doing? How you doing?
Eddie, your dog voice?
What's up, Joey? How are you, man?
Come on.
Oh, man.
See,
That's
what
not
I
true.
tell you,
That's
you
not
can't
true.
trust that, right? So if is it Reggie? Is that what I said the name is?
I believe so.
Or no, Franklin.
Franklin.
Okay, here we go. Franklin, hello, baby. Hello, Franklin. Hello, Franklin. I'd like to know right now, is Franklin listening to the radio now looking around? Hello, baby.
I think he ran out of the room.
Probably so.
Where's
right?
Sally? I didn't know we had a Sally in here.
I'm just telling you. By the way, Tim Neiman. I should have known Tim Neiman would know this answer. Tim Neiman is correct. So too, whoever this is at the 402 number. I don't have your name in here. Sorry. Well, I didn't give the whole number. The Manford Man song, which is Blinded by the Light, was written by Bruce Springsteen. That is the only song to go #1 on the Billboard chart. Eddie Garrison sent his guess of Dancing in the Dark, which went to #2. Dancing in the Dark at #2, I believe, was stopped by Prince and Purple Rain. Either Purple Rain or When Doves Cry. Stopped
Both
Dancing
would
in the
make
Dark
sense
from going to
to
#1.
get stiff arm.
I also sent you pictures of my animals.
I did say, and here's the thing, Eddie. Eddie sent pictures of his dog here, which even though he's sitting
Both
right next
dogs.
to me. Now, one of your dogs, Eddie, the middle one here.
Okay.
Okay, this dog, I can tell, has something in common with you.
What's
Now-
that?
I would not post this picture. I was going to post it, but it has your phone number on his collar.
Uh-huh.
This is a dog clearly that enjoyed a few watermelon gummies. This middle, am I right?
That was 2 nights ago.
Huh?
That was 2 nights ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm showing it here on the.
Well,
I'm covering
it
up
was
the phone
the weekend.
number. I'm showing it on the, and for those on the YouTube chat,
It's the up top camera.
is it?
Yeah.
Sorry. But that dog looks like he has enjoyed a couple of libations over the course of the night, right?
I think he was more upset that I was taking a picture and the flash woke him up.
That's tough.
Yeah, that does happen. What's his name?
That's Yogi,
Okay,
a corgi.
Yogi's a good-looking fella.
He just turned 3 last week.
And the kitty's name?
Kitty.
The kitty's name is Kitty?
Child. His name is actually Child.
Child. Okay.
Olivia had a big thing for Baby Yoda, and his name is Child.
The Mandalorian for those that are on the up and up.
So Scott Agnes is in Paris and is going to join. He's taking time away. Can we get him to get in Europe? And I think they can do this here. I think they can toggle it. This is what I would do if I was an ambulance driver.
Oh, you like the different sounds? Yeah.
It's everywhere in Paris, right?
Yep.
Are you sure you're supposed to be doing that on the radio?
Can we get Scott to be out on the street and maybe get if he's out on the street, we'll hear that at least once in the background. I guarantee it.
For sure.
Totally guarantee it.
Are you willing to bail him out to make that noise happen?
What's that?
Are you willing to supply his bail to make that noise happen?
I don't know how that works over there.
Yeah, I have no
right?
idea. Yeah, I don't know.
And what's the euro exchange right now? Do we know?
Probably 1.3 euros to dollar, I would guess.
That's probably about right. We do have one big question that might have been answered from the Colts yesterday, and that leads to another big question that can be answered about the Colts today. I'll tell you what that is and give you the answer next. Now, apparently, when Springsteen wrote this song, according to the interwebs. It was actually on a challenge where he was asked if he could write a song by a word limitation of like 100 total words or something like that. And the song seemingly, like lyrically speaking, makes no sense whatsoever. It's just a bunch of words thrown together that rhyme.
I assume he got abducted.
It's a great song, actually. And I think he recorded it at one time, and then obviously the Manfred Mann's Earth Band ended up recording it, and it went to number 1. Okay, so we know now that the Colts have a defensive coordinator. Now, we're all going to say it 3 times. You ready?
Together, or we're going to go around the room?
Anarumo.
No.
Not even close.
No.
Anarumo.
No.
Not even close.
You have the first half right.
Anarumo.
Yes.
Anarumo.
There you go.
Anarumo.
There you are.
Anarumo.
Well done.
This is my new Dustin
Dopirak.
Yes.
You're going to have to get him on the show now so we can record it so that you have it in the archives.
Anarumo.
There you are.
Mm-hmm.
Well done.
So Lou Anarumo
Confident
is the
now.
new defensive coordinator of the Bengals. He has a background
Of the Colts.
Or excuse me, of the Colts. He comes from the Bengals. Thank you.
You're
His
welcome.
background is the Bengals and Dolphins as a D coordinator. He also was an assistant at Purdue from 2004 to 2011, working in defensive backs for both Joe Tiller and Danny Hope. And as we talked about with Stephen Holder just a little bit ago, and more so in talking to Ben Baby, who covers the Bengals down in Cincinnati, he is more of, and I'll use the term hybrid, a hybrid coordinator. What I mean by that is I don't know that there is any one scheme that you would say he is married to, but rather comes up with different kinds of schemes depending on what kind of offense you're going up against. If you're going up against an offense that is primarily run, you load the box. If you're going up against an offense that is one that, does a lot of RPO, you go to a different, maybe a more spread defense, or you drop things back a little bit. Somebody that's strictly a passing offense, you're more heavy on the blitz. So when the Colts are coming off of a system that you saw with Gus Bradley, that I think some people actually probably fatigued by it, that was a little bit more conservative, but also used players that fit that scheme. Now you're going to have the ability for some of these players, Jimmy, to show if they can play in a more open system or play in different sorts of areas. And one of the things that now I'm curious about is this good news in the, for example, the bargaining negotiation or the price tag for an E.J. Speed? Does E.J. Speed and his agent now say, look, he's a free agent, we realize, but you're going to need guys that can play with, more space, or guys that can play in different areas, and we think our guy can do that, as opposed to being locked into one simple kind of a scheme. And furthermore, from the defensive back standpoint, because of the fact, Ben Baby mentioned a couple of times that, here we go, Anarumo's background being in defensive backs, that he kind of leaned on that position. That's the one that he knows the most. Is that good news now for whether it be a Juju Brents, assuming he can stay healthy, because I do think Juju Brents is a good player, or a Kenny Moore, a little undersized, but does he now lean on those guys to really kind of lead his defense, so to speak? But either way, I think this is going to be interesting in terms of what the Colts do from a personnel standpoint, because I think there's more flexibility of players that they can utilize.
I still believe in what Juju Brents can bring to the table. You're knocking on wood that he stays healthy, but I still believe in him as a starting NFL corner. Stephen Holder mentioned it earlier. Podcast will be up on the Podcast Center or wherever you get your podcast, Search and Query and Company, that Kenny Moore would appear to be pretty excited about that. He was utilized more underneath Eberflus's scheme in multiple looks than he was just in one or two objectives with Gus Bradley as a defensive coordinator. But outside of those two, it's a bad room. It just is. It's a secondary that gets picked apart on a weekly basis. And if there's one area of fit, scheme, and what they're going to want week in and week out, to have that type of diversity, to have the multi-scheme looks based on a matchup that Lou Anarumo wants to have, they need to go out in free agency and go get a veteran cornerback. They need that in their room. I don't want it to be a corner that they find in the draft in the third round they think they can develop for 3 or 4 years. You can do that too. That's fine. But you need a proven veteran that is still near the height of his powers in this league to jumpstart what Anarumo wants to do from a defensive standpoint. But the other reason why I like the hire is as long as you're committed, and Chris Ballard was likely going to do this anyway, at least based on what he told the media, but he's forced to do it now. As long as you are committed to overhaul this defense in the offseason, especially in that secondary, they're going to be a better group than they were a year ago. And not only that, but this is a coordinator that if you were a fan of any team in the AFC that is either still playing or was just playing, whether it's me with the Chiefs, whether you're a Bills fan, whether you're a Ravens fan, he would give you nightmares because you never know down to down what they're going to run schematically. If it's man, if it's zone, if they're bringing pressure, if they're not, if they're disguising it, if they're dropping 8, you don't know. And in a league, and a conference especially, that is dominated by quarterback play, if you don't think your quarterback's good enough, boy, you better have something defensively to match the other side's weaponry, or you're screwed. He gives you hope for that. You still need to supply him with the personnel, but you brought up the mad scientist nickname for Belichick. That's actually one that's also attributed to Anarumo because of his ability to give nightmares to opposing quarterbacks. But if Ballard's not going to meet him and not going to follow his edict of, I've seen the error of my ways and I'm going to spend in free agency, if we are still talking about the cornerback room specifically going into April's draft, just pack it in. Forget about it.
If I find out that when he gets to town that Lou Anarumo immediately went out for a beer with Dustin Dopirak and Zach Osterman.
Nailed them all, by the way. Good on you.
I think the Osterman one, play that again, Eddie.
Osterman.
He is so emphatic on the part that now I'll never unhear that. So I think that one I've got down pat.
Yeah.
And I mean this honestly as no disrespect to these individuals. I don't know why it is that I have this hurdle with these things.
I would have thought, and look, everybody has their quirks, but I would have thought with how emphatic Ben Baby swatted you to decide with, I've never heard anybody say it that way. I would have thought you'd be like, okay, Anarumo, let's go. He was like, now, what's going on here?
I'll tell you another one, though, and this is the origin of all of this. Mm-hmm. I was about 15 years old before I realized that I had been saying the kind of vehicle that a Harley-Davidson is what, Jimmy?
A motorcycle.
Were you saying motorcycle?
Yes. I said motorcycle forever. And people are like, what? I'm like, a motorcycle. And they're like, where did you come up with that? I'm like, I don't know. What is a Schwinn? What's a 10-speed or a Schwinn? What kind of vehicle is that?
Bicycle.
Okay. So the suffix is what?
Cycle.
But you didn't say bicycle. You said bicycle.
Yes.
So I just assumed
so that's how he's saying the
you're
association
replacing
happens.
the prefix of bi, meaning
that.
to, with motor, meaning motorized, and I'm like, still sickle remains the same. So I was like, motorcycle.
I also have heard people say motorcycle before, but I think that's a regional thing. Like pop or like, okay. I think it has a
soft drink to you is what?
A soda.
Eddie?
Soda.
For you?
Coke.
See, I was going to say that, but yeah, right? But like,
honestly, I'll say, hey, you want to stop and get a Coke? And I mean, I might go in and get a Mountain Dew or a 7-Up or a Dr. Pepper, sure. But I'm like, generically speaking,
well,
I
say that at home, but that's what's in the fridge. I know it's Coke. Right. I'm not worried about getting burnt by the waitress or
I know
server.
I've told you guys this before, but it's...
Do you have Coke? No, just Pepsi.
So we drink caffeine-free Diet Coke?
When you ask if you have Coke, to me, that's a different language.
Yeah, Yogi knows all about that. We were at... I told you during COVID, when we were coming back from Wisconsin, we stopped at Woodman's, which is this massive grocery store in Wisconsin, and we couldn't find caffeine-free Diet Coke anywhere here. And Shannon said, we should look for it here because and they had it. So we bought like literally, I don't know, I've told you guys this, like 3 cases of it. It was ridiculous. We get in the car and I said, God, Shannon, that was such a smart idea for you to look for that in that place. And you're right, it's so big, why would they not have it? And she said, oh, no, I just knew they'd have it because it's Wisconsin and nobody's on a diet. Brilliant. And that was really her line of thinking. Scott Agnes next. Is that right, Eddie?
Yes, sirs.
Okay. We're going to go over the pond. We're going to try to find some, and don't say the yes sirs thing, by the way.
I'll say whatever I want to say.
I caught it, but wee over to Parit next. You know, the more, as I just heard Andy talking about Kevin coming back tomorrow, I'm really happy for Kevin that Notre Dame did not win because, and I promise I'm not going to belabor this point like every single hour of every day that we're doing the show.
I don't believe you.
But you can say all you want, like, oh, you know, he's going to run around Monument Circle in a Speedo if Notre Dame had won. And even right now, being just, you know, a couple of hours removed from being outside, it takes you forget how bad it is until you go right, and then immediately.
I walked to Chick-fil-A before the show on Washington Street. That's maybe a 4-minute walk. I was over it when I walked out onto the circle.
You need to.
And you were totally bundled up, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible. I got out to get gas, and I'm like, holy cow. Brutal. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line in what is probably a tropical feeling Paris, France. It is 34 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius. Scott Agnes joins us from Fieldhouse Files. Pacers in action Thursday. As a matter of fact, Thursday's show right about now is when the game will be tipping off. We will be done at 1:30 on Thursday to get it out to Mark, Eddie, Pat, and the boys with the Pacers broadcast. Scott, you got into Paris when, and thank you for joining us from over there. It's pretty cool to have somebody from Paris joining us.
Yeah, appreciate it. I love technology, the fact that I can join you like I'm in studio right here from my hotel room. But I got in about 6 a.m. local time here on Monday. The team came a little bit later, arrived around noon. So we've been here about a day and a half or so. And it's for the team, it's mostly been exploring, a couple practice opportunities, and a chance to kind of stretch their legs and get shots up after their flight.
Okay, so they, in terms of like just some of the team activities and things like that, I mean, I know that they've got like a team photo they're going to do, and then I would assume probably even like just seeing some of the sites or taking it in and taking advantage of it, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, and certainly it's well planned, orchestrated by both the NBA and individuals from the Pacers who have flown over here many times in the last 6 months. Cool job, right? To kind of set things up and figure out what they have, and all of them, I think, brought a spouse or a special someone, which makes it a little bit better of a trip and more enjoyable for them. But there's a variety of things going on. Including this morning, they were over at the Eiffel Tower before practice to get the official team photo. Of course, you got to knock that out. Again, they've been over to practice and get shots up a couple of times. Nothing super formal. Again, they have a bigger open practice time set for tomorrow afternoon here. Jim Boylan was part of a coach's clinic last night, the Pacers assistant coach. Jan Mahimi, the former Pacer and former Spur, is doing several different things out here, including in junior NBA wheelchair clinic tonight and something else the next couple of nights. And then the Pacers also have some free time for themselves that they can go wherever they want. For example, I was walking down the main strip shopping area last night, Jake, and you'll appreciate this. Here come a couple of black Mercedes vans, and out popped, 6 players in each one. They were going directly to the Louis Vuitton store. And so there was Chris Paul and several other players that I recognized right away.
Hey, man, I mean, when in Rome, right? I don't know if you know this or not, but on Canal Street in New York, you can get the Louis Vuitton store for a much more affordable price, just so you know. But
that's Scott, helpful because it's clearly, something that's why I saw them. I was headed in myself.
That's
clearly.
Right. That's right. Nothing like a $1,600 wallet. Scott, for those that are unfamiliar, Paris is and I've only been to Paris one time. I'm not trying to sound like some expert on Paris, but, it is a huge metropolitan area, obviously. The Eiffel Tower is just one area of Paris itself. There are several different neighborhoods of Paris. The arena where they are playing, is this right in like centralized Paris, or are they playing kind of more in the suburbs? To give it, I guess, an Indianapolis equivalent, they are playing in what area of Paris in relation to how it would be in Indianapolis?
Ooh, that's a good question. What should I describe it at? For one, everything is like New York or any major city. It's connected with a great train system that runs right through everything right there. They're playing at Accor Arena, which is kind of southeast I want to say, but not too far from the Louvre and all of that. I think it's probably a 20, 30-minute car ride, depending on practice. It's where a lot of the events took place during the Paris Olympics, of course, as well. And the teams are mostly staying near the Arc de Triomphe right here. So it's not too bad. I don't know, maybe over just east, Warren Central, maybe, something like that.
Okay, that's not terrible, yeah. I mean, so just on the outskirts of it.
Scott, when I was over there in 2016, I went to Lyon briefly, and I share this because I saw two guys with a Pacers hat and a Heat hat on. And this was in 2016. It was 2 years removed from those matchups in the conference finals. And you'll get that every now and again whenever you have teams in like the Final Four of a sport, then there'll be ripple effects, and you'll see the hats and gear. But I was so surprised to see a Pacers hat that far from home. Obviously, that's different now because this is a marquee game, and Pacers fans you would think, have made the trip. As you've been walking around, how much blue and gold have you seen out there in Paris to this point?
I haven't seen much NBA at all in terms of fans and stuff. And I gather that's maybe because, that was especially yesterday and you're 3 or 4 days out. It's another Paris Fashion Week as well, and I feel like there's a lot more of that. That was most obvious. I actually don't even remember, Jimmy, just yet seeing anyone in obvious NBA Pacers Spurs gear at all. Now, I've mostly been inside working today, but I think tomorrow I would expect. What I can tell you is much like Indianapolis does whenever they host major events, is there is a lot of banners and advertisements. I walked by the local Foot Locker. There was a banner right on the window outside. If you took 2 steps in, you would see 2 Pacers jerseys. You go inside the Nike store. They've clearly planned this out. One section in the left side is Spurs. The other is Pacers with fresh gear. And I can't imagine ordinarily there's any Pacers jerseys there, because you look to the left, there's Wemby jerseys. To the right, there's Lakers and LeBron James jerseys. That's one area maybe, too, where the Pacers are benefiting, is just the exposure, the marketing, maybe some that I haven't heard of Indiana or the Pacers for that matter.
Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. The NBA has shown over the years they want to continue to grow the game and have these global mecca events, but certainly it being in Paris has a lot to do, of course, with Victor Wembanyama and his dominance and being perceived as the next great player in the league. We saw a brief flash of that during the Olympics, how heavy Paris national team those crowds were during USA's run to gold. Safe to assume that in both these matchups, it's going to be a heavy Spurs contingent because of Victor Wembanyama. I don't mean NBA American Spurs fans. I mean everybody's cheering for the Spurs because it's Wemby on the floor.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. I mean, what are we expecting? Like 90% to be that way, at least? Like that's what my anticipation is, certainly going into this. I mean, the Pacers practiced at his old gym earlier today, for example. He was over at initiative to dedicate a gym in in his hometown. This whole thing, I think, is all about taking Victor home. The Spurs are along for the ride, and so are the Pacers. But I view this week all about Wembanyama and the fact that also with the NBA they're able to have 2 regular season games here, whereas ordinarily they've previously maybe had 1 game or some preseason games. That's what's unique about this for the Pacers, is their last trip, it was just preseason games, so the games didn't matter. These are 2 regular season games, and what that also means, unfortunately, is for Pacer fans in Indianapolis, you only see the Spurs, for example, once a year, and this year you won't see Wemby in town because of this trip.
Do they do any combined team activities?
I think there might be like a green initiative tomorrow afternoon where they'll be doing the same things. But I think the Pacers are like in a media workroom, and the Spurs, I think, are maybe on the main court where they're maybe packing bags and doing things like that. But I'm not expecting, probably to your point, of them going in loading up in buses and going to the same event somewhere else or putting on a clinic together.
What most intrigues you in terms of the game itself look, Indiana's playing really well. No question about it, Scott. You almost wonder if this didn't come at a bad time because they're rolling, right? You just kind of want to keep it going. But what intrigues you about what you might see with the return, for example, and the increased minutes of Aaron Nesmith, rotations, etc.?
Yeah, I think for right now it's probably the contrasting way the seasons have gone, the Spurs are the opposite to what you just referenced. They've lost 6 of 7. They've lost any momentum. The Pacers come in here winning like 10 of 12 and hitting their stride at the right time. I also like the fact for the Pacers, Jake, is while they do have the travel, it's not horrible. Like Indy was like 14 hours, I think. This is only 8 hours. It didn't even seem that long. They did it overnight where if they took advantage, the players could sleep during most of it. But I think coming into this one, first of all, it's how they contain Victor in particular. And then second of all, just can they keep the rhythm, what they've done defensively. We know they can score, but the thing that has most impressed me, Jake, over the last 30 days probably, since that December 13th date where things change, is what they have done defensively, because I didn't think they could do it quite at this level. We were all saying you just need to be mediocre. You just need to be, 15th, 18th, and not be awful, like 28th, like they were in the first month of the season. In terms of Nesmith and Mathurin and who starts, to me, that's a question you answer in like 3 weeks when Nesmith's no longer on a minutes restriction, where he's really comfortable out there, and you're coming off an all-star break.
Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files with us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Scott, is there any fear or maybe just early focus from Pacers or Spurs groupings that this could have a all-star weekend type of lull on the back end of it? I mean, I know it's only 4 days, but you look at the Pacers schedule based on a brief glance from myself, only one other time this season has there been a 4-day layoff. It was back in December when they go and they play Phoenix after having played New Orleans 4 nights earlier. But we're talking about all this international travel, all the hoopla around it. Is there reason for any slight anxiety or fear of, to Jake's point, good vibes are rolling right now? Does it become a bit more difficult to turn the switch back on once they're stateside?
I think the only unusual thing here, Jimmy, is just getting accustomed to the new sights and sounds. And are these fans, how do they act? Are they more European fans that we see on viral videos online? Or do they kind of sit back and more the corporate crowd we often see back in the States? That's different. The sight lines for shots. I think by the time Thursday arrives, they're going through pregame warmups. That's just going to feel like a normal game day for them.
Scott, I should re-clarify the question. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I meant when it's over, when they get back here, are you looking at any type of lull because of it's a 4-day break between when they last play in Paris to their next regular season game? All that travel, does that create any anxiety or lull of, okay, we're doing this to promote the game, but this is a real wrench in a schedule when things are going pretty smoothly right now out of 2025 for the Pacers?
Well, I don't think so, and here's why. What was their biggest issue the first month and a half, too? It was injuries. It was health. It was Tyrese not looking himself and not looking like himself and playing well. I think this is advantageous. They paid the price of having this 10-day period with only 2 games earlier in the season when they had 5 games in 8 days, those sort of things. It does break your rhythm, no doubt about that. But I think for this team, with the number one thing being health, time to lock in and talk defensively, I only can see positives that mostly come out of this. And then to come back, you face a Central Division foe as you return in Detroit, who has given them tough battles. I'm not too worried about that.
They got a free breakfast there at the Paris Super 8.
Super 8. You know I'm a Marriott guy.
Is it okay? So now, if it's a continental breakfast, is it different since it's a different continent? Do you know? Have you checked that out?
I have not. Much like you, I don't operate very well early in mornings, so I've not been down for practice.
That Alex Golden's dead to me now, Scott, because we had him on the other day, and he said that he needed somebody to do a podcast late, and he said, but J&V is the only person that stays up late that knows the Pacers. And
oh, wow.
I'm like, wait a minute, isn't that like I don't have really any skill set, but my ability to stay up for like 36 straight hours is the one, right?
Absolutely, and always be on call and answer your phone as well when people need you.
So which variation of Marriott are we in here? Are we in a are you in a JW? Are you in a just a standard Marriott? What are we going with here?
We're going with the Le Méridien.
Ooh, look at you. Cashing in some points, are you?
You know it.
Man, that's impressive.
Yeah, so it was actually one of the cheaper options, to be honest. Where we're staying, it is obviously loaded with 4- and 5-star hotels. And so this was the only one really of good value. And it's right off the Metro. It's actually where a couple media friends stayed during the Paris Olympics. So they gave, high regards for it. So
I'll tell you what,
I can't,
the subway system, whatever you want to call it there, I loved it. It was really easy to figure, obviously the translation, right? I mean, you don't know half the words of what you're reading, but once the maps itself, I mean, I thought it was super easy to get around. I mean, I loved being over there because I thought it was very easy to navigate around.
Yeah, I totally agree. The only thing I struggle with, and this is same in the U.S., is when it tells you the end destination. Well, I don't know what the end destination is for a city I'm not familiar with, right? I'm looking like 6 stops.
Right.
So you really have to go find the map. And so I actually I had to switch trains and then change locations. And on one of them, I took it going the other way, so I had to get off and backtrack. That's the only thing gets me, though.
I think we did that once also, where you realize you're going the wrong direction, you go across the platform and come back down. Now, the other thing, did you notice this? There are all kinds of, and one of the things I loved about it there, Scott Agnes is our guest. He was over in Paris with the Pacers. They have cafes, obviously, everywhere. And did you notice that there's a chain or a line of cafes there called Indiana? Did you notice that?
I have not yet, no.
Yes, there is I don't know, there are probably 10 of them, like around, you see it, and it's the outdoor cafe, and then boom. That's where the Pacers should get a team photo. I know the Eiffel Tower is the easy thing, but go find an Indiana cafe and go in there and see if you can get – now, they probably get a free breakfast, right? I mean, they're Indiana, right?
One would think. You're right. Yeah, I will say there was one bar I ran into on recommendation last night. It was called Harry's New York Bar, I think it was. And you would appreciate this. It had all kinds of merchandise, and there was pennants from all kinds of teams. And the people I were with, we were all looking up and finding our university. So there was IU, and over here was Penn State, and there was Notre Dame. Cool. So, and they say, you never know what to believe, but they say it's the home of the Bloody Mary. So had to have one of those.
Well, actually, if you want to know, there was a terrible crime with a woman named Mary back in 1738. No, I'm just kidding. So Harry's New York is what it's called?
Harry's New York Bar, I believe. Yep.
All right, fair enough. All right, so what's the agenda tonight? Because right now it is what, 7:20 over there?
8:20.
8:20. All right. So what's the evening agenda here?
Going to put out a story to Fieldhouse Files subscribers about a lot of the stuff we just talked about, details of how they got here and what they've been up to. Then I'll probably go out for dinner, and then we'll see after that.
All right. I will tell you, there's some very elaborate cafe that Ernest Hemingway was known to frequent. So I decided to go there for dinner when I was in Paris and ordered the only thing on the menu that I could, because it was super French. This was like really, really, really French.
Is that inside the Ritz by chance?
No. He obviously had several places that he went, right?
Okay. I was told to go to the Ritz for a special cafe. I thought it was Hemingway, but I could be off.
It was a restaurant itself, and it was in a very like non-tourist area, and I'm such a moron. The one thing that I could recognize, I'm like, okay, so duck. I can recognize duck on the menu. And I thought it was just going to be like, like a chicken breast, like a duck breast, right? Well, it was a pate, and it was $79. I remember that. And it was literally the size of like half a Pop-Tart, and it was just a pate spread with like 9 crackers and 5 grapes. And I literally looked at it and was like, really? And so we ended up going across the street, and I got a croissant, ham and cheese croissant across the street.
Had one of those today with a cappuccino.
That's the best. I'm telling you, you can actually eat there inexpensively because you don't tip either. But then check out the Super 8. They got a good continental breakfast, from my understanding. Scott, we appreciate it. We'll look for the story on Fieldhouse Files, all right?
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Scott Agnes joining us from Paris, which is pretty cool to do. And inside his room. Now, was he shaking a Morocco each? Did you notice that? That sound?
My best guess would be.
Did he have a gypsy
moving around the mic, maybe? Maybe he had on one of those iPhone mics where it's right next to your shirt and it was rubbing against it the whole time.
I think Scott seemed offended that I didn't know he was staying at the Marriott.
There was a bit of a little scoff there. I caught that too.
Mm-hmm. You guys smell that? It smells like something's burning in here.
Something's burning?
Yeah.
Would that be your ears? Were we talking about you?
I don't know.
I do not smell anything burning, although I'm a little stopped up. Is it your computer? Because your computer frequently just all of a sudden decides to
That's usually
overheat.
Yours.
That's probably true,
Was
too.
there a punchline you were waiting to drop there, or did you just...
No. I'm concerned.
You were legitimately asking.
Yes,
there wasn't
I'm
a
concerned.
second half.
I thought maybe it was Scott's ears that were burning when he heard me talking about the Marriott.
Look, I doubt at this stage in the game. I mean, I know you could, but like, there's no Pacers fan right now, I think, that's listening to this and is like, you know what? Because RIP those direct flights from Indy to Paris. I'm going to go right now and I'm going to journey to go see the game. But if you already have tickets or you already have that journey plan, I mean, we've both been there the one time, but it's great. Like it's
amazing. Yeah,
there's so much old world history there. I mean, you're knocking off a ton of landmarks out of the gate too, and yeah, it's just a beautiful spot.
I think the thing that's a challenge about it is a city that, I mean, it's a region just in general, but you need minimum like probably 4 or 5 days just to see everything,
for sure.
Right? You know, I'll tell you what was helpful for me. Aiden Gent is a good buddy of mine who is a Paralympian that ran for Indiana State and now is a teacher over at Heron. Really good dude. Aiden had been to Paris several times, and so before I went, I gave him a list of the things that I wanted to see, and then he said, and I would gladly do this for anybody if they're going over to Paris because it was really helpful. I gave him a list of the things I wanted to see, and then he sent it back to me and said, okay, and he paired the things per day. So in other words,
nice. He travel planned for you.
If you were doing Indianapolis, if somebody said, I'm going to Indianapolis and I want to see, these 5 things, you would say, okay, so on day 1, you would want to do the Speedway with, let's say, if you wanted something on the west side, and then they said, well, I really want to see, Bloomington and Lafayette. You wouldn't do those in the same day, right? You'd have it. So he paired them with me so that we didn't cross a bunch of ground and were able to really very easily go from one place to the next. And that was huge. It was a huge help.
I had the ultimate cheat code because my niece and her fiance, but then after that trip was over, husband was a French national, and she's had French as a second language her whole life. So,
huge.
If you have that type of edge going into a foreign country, you're golden.
I told you earlier, my motorcycle thing.
Uh-huh.
Another thing I didn't know, I've probably said this to you guys before. Everywhere that I went the first day that I'm there, I would say bonjour. I'd walk in somewhere and I'm like, bonjour. Do you know the problem with that?
Yeah, it's not. You're wrong on the time frame for when
Correct.
that can be used.
That's good morning.
Yeah.
I always thought bonjour was just French for hello.
Yeah.
But it's hello, but it's basically good morning. Bonsoir is good day.
Yeah.
So after whatever. So, like 8 o'clock at night, here's dumb Hoosier Jake. Hey, bonjour. They're like, okay,
man,
bud.
the time change is getting after that guy big time.
That guy's only eating at the Indiana Cafe. That's what they were saying to themselves, right? Last night, Notre Dame, and I could tell earlier when I asked Jimmy about it, he's not letting it on right now because he's trying to focus on the fact that his Chiefs still have a chance to redeem everything for him in this football season. But Jimmy was disappointed about Notre Dame, and I thought of last night an Indiana high school football trivia question that is one of those query brain droppings that I'm fairly convinced has to be the first time this potentially has happened. And there's a guy in the area that I was talking with last night, and I said, I wonder if you'd be the first person ever to have this happen for Indiana high school football as it related to what we saw last night in Atlanta and what we might see in a couple of weeks in New Orleans. And I'll put that all together, the pieces of that puzzle next. totally love this song. And yet this was like the Steve Miller Band, like, hey, man, we got to get in on this new wave sound. It's kind of their last hurrah, right?
Yeah.
So last night I'm watching the national championship game between the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame and the Buckeyes of Ohio State. And as I'm watching it, I thought, you know what? I want to get Caden Curry on the show, who, of course, is, a wrecking ball defensive lineman for Ohio State and was a tremendous player at Center Grove. And I have met Eric Moore, the head football coach at Center Grove, before, but I thought, you know what? He doesn't know me from Adam. But I texted him. I got his number and sent him a text that said, we have not met, and I would not expect you to know who this is, but let me explain. My name is Jake Quarry, and I do a radio show here in town, and I would love to get Caden Curry on the show. And that began a dialogue back and forth where we were texting just about football and coaches and stuff like that. And then it dawned on me, I had this epiphany, this brain dropping, if you will, that suddenly hit me as I'm watching the game. And I'm sure as soon as I say this, somebody's going to be like, dude, are you a moron? What about blank? But I began to wonder if the Kansas City Chiefs are to win the Super Bowl, which we know is probably not going to happen because Buffalo is going to beat them, and it's going to be difficult to win the Super Bowl if you're not in it. But
thought that was a Baltimore train for you, but I digress.
If the Chiefs are to win the Super Bowl, and the Super Bowl is when this year, date-wise? What is the date? February 9th, right?
Yeah, I believe that's right, in New Orleans.
That would mean that Carson Steele wins a Super Bowl and Caden Curry wins a national championship. And then I thought to myself, would that be the first time that an Indiana high school football coach has had a college football national champion and a Super Bowl winner within 3 weeks of each other? Like in the same season, from the same school. It had to have happened at some point, right? But to be honest with you, the number of Super Bowl winning players out of Indiana high school, I mean, it's probably more than you would imagine. But I think about pairing it with a college player that would have been still playing in college at the same time and on a national championship team. I couldn't think of any combos. I mean, I could think of players from this area that have won a Super Bowl for certain. But Cathedral, you would think at some point would have had to have had this done,
sure.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, or maybe a Ben Davis or somebody like that. But
is there a Cathedral product on the Ohio State roster? Because if there was, and the Commanders are to win it, then Cathedral would have it, right? Yeah. But did McLaurin, though? Yeah, I'm trying to think. Because they've had coaching changes at Cathedral.
I think it's still Peebles, isn't it?
How long has Peebles been there? Did Peebles have McLaurin?
I believe so. I'm 75% certain in that.
Okay.
So, yeah, you get the same.
So, I don't know if it wouldn't surprise me if there's a Cathedral player on the Ohio State roster somewhere, right?
No, I wouldn't.
But that would be the school that would come to mind first. But
we'll put
either
Yogi
way,
and
pretty
Eddie
cool,
on the
right?
task, and they can
do
the research there on the Ohio State roster. But, yeah, that's always – you and I were talking about this over the weekend, Jake. It's funny, the quirkiness of either NFL or college rosters to find the path at which they got there.
Totally.
And everybody talks about, what a small world. But, yeah, I mean, when you have those branches, it becomes pretty small.
I mean, there are guys, you and I talked about this, Jimmy, off air. I remember when the Bucs won their Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Bucs. I think it was Todd Yoder. Was that his name? It was a tight end from New Pal. And I'm like, I have no recollection of this guy playing at New Pal. Or the big one that always jumps out to me that just, you look at and go, what? And he was a really good player in the NFL for a long time. Paul Spicer was a mainstay Jags lineman for a long time that played at Northwest High School here in town. And I don't recall him in high school at all, right?
Right, yeah. No, I don't either.
Caden Curry would be the only one.
Now, Ohio State also has a guy from Beech Grove.
Yep, Josh Fryer,
right?
And then Ian Moore from New Pal, Floyd Central's Zach Michalinski, Josh Mickens from Lawrence Central.
Okay, so none of those schools.
And Mylan Graham from New Haven.
Yeah, see, none of them have a current NFL player, right? To pair up with to try to win a Super Bowl. This is the stuff that when I'm up 36 straight hours, these are the things that pop in, right, to the filing cabinet. Roll it out, pull it out, right? I'm just saying.
And it's enough that you could fill a library with it, Jake.
Well, the problem is oftentimes these questions that I come up with are open-ended, and then I'm like, I don't know. I probably should have looked into the answer as well. But this one, I'm legitimately asking people if they know the answer.
I want to give proper pronunciation here. It's actually Zen Maholski. I totally butchered that. My apologies. It's from Floyd Central.
Okay, now hold on.
Additionally, our friend Rob Brown writes in that it was not Peebles underneath his tutelage of McLaurin.
Somebody points this one out. This is a good one. Chris Jones and Hunter Johnson at Brownsburg. Jones was with the Patriots but I don't recall if Hunter Johnson was on the roster. Was he? He might have been like a freshman when Clemson won it with Trevor Lawrence. So that might be right.
Had to do some double checking on that front.
That's a really good one.
Who was the other one? Who were the names again?
From Brownsburg High School, Chris Jones and Hunter Johnson. Jones was apparently with the Patriots when Johnson was at Clemson. And I remember Hunter Johnson at Clemson for certain. Matter of fact, he went to Clemson to Northwestern and then back to Clemson. He was like the number one pro-style quarterback in the country, and collegiately, never. I mean, he was a good player. But
he was at Clemson in 17, Northwestern 18 to 21, and Clemson in 22.
So in 17, I was trying to think of this. Did he win a ring at Clemson?
Chris Jones was not on the Patriots in 17. He was with the 49ers.
There you go. So not within the same gap, within the same postseason is what I'm getting at, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie to you, Jimmy. Sometimes it's a curse, right? To sit and ponder these things, sometimes it's a curse.
Is it ever a blessing, Jake?
I mean, like people tell me all the time, they're like, you're so full of worthless knowledge. And I'm like, it is worthless, except for that I've managed to parlay it into a job, right? But knowing the completion of the knowledge is the real challenge here. And here's the thing. And this is the thing, though, and this is also a curse, okay? People listening right now, driving in their car or sitting at their desk or whatever, they're all saying to themselves two things. They're saying to themselves, number one, why does this guy come up with this kind of inane crap? And then number two, they're going to be cursing me because it's like when you put a song in somebody's head and then 10 hours later it's still stuck in their head. People are going to be sitting at the dinner table tonight and they're going to be like, you know what? I heard this guy talking about this. And then they're going to call their buddy. What about so-and-so? Yeah, okay. What about Rod Woodson when he was did anybody from Fort Wayne Snyder win a national championship when he was in Pittsburgh, whatever, right?
Yeah, it winds up being an earworm, and you can't get it out, and then it pops up again. You're like, oh, man, that's right.
Then again, I don't know that Rod Woodson won a Super Bowl in Pittsburgh, did he? He did in Baltimore, right?
I believe so.
Rod Woodson? I knew he won one, yeah. I'm just telling you.
So you think, though, as you kind of teased last thing, you think I'm being more guarded than I am? Like, I am really proud of what Notre Dame did last night. At halftime, I'll be honest with you, honestly, I was in the dumps, and I was like, man, this is a dark place. And then they didn't roll over and die. They had a chance late.
What was interesting is when we talked about it earlier, and I told you, when Riley Leonard scored that first touchdown, you could just tell he knew, holy cow, I'm going to have to do this like 5 times.
And for reference, because you brought up how tired he was, he carried the ball 8, maybe 9 times that drive. He had carried it 14 times the entirety of the Penn State game. Like, they asked just wrecking ball Riley Leonard, throw up at the middle.
He yacked on the sidelines, didn't he?
He did, yes. Yeah.
So he went back and recycled, right?
Exactly.
It's officially official now for Lou Anarumo and the Colts, if you're wondering.
Pen to paper?
Yes.
Nice.
Pen has been put to paper.
Nice.
And Leonard was great. I mean, listen, he had that drive was impressive. I mean, and it was impressive all the way across the board for Notre Dame, that opening drive. The thing is just when Ohio State got the ball back and you could just tell, man. I mean,
all the fears of the analysis of how many weapons they have and how hard it was going to be to stop them came to fruition.
Correct. You knew you were going to have at least like Nick Saban said it best at halftime when he said, "Look, they can't get them off the field on third down. They just cannot get them off the field."
Like 7 of 11 or something like that.
And so that put such pressure on the offense because Notre Dame knew they could not have wasted possessions. They just couldn't, right? And what I'm getting at is, Jimmy, I could tell, and I mean this respectfully because I get it. When you were talking about the game earlier, I could see your brain pulling up the slides out of the projector of the plays where you felt like, man, they were so close. If this just would have gone this way and that would have gone that way and that would have gone that way, then we have a different game. And you start playing those things over and over in your mind, just wishing that. I thought about it so much as I was watching the game last night because I remembered what that was like seeing when I was watching Clemson in a national championship game, and I wanted so badly for them to beat Alabama, and when they didn't do it, you wake up the next morning and you're thinking, gosh, maybe they'll go back and say that one play didn't count. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you just start in your mind.
I don't have as much of that feeling, and I get what you're highlighting because you want to say, oh, they were right there. Like Ohio State was clearly the better team. Like they were a more complete team. It's the rare game where all of the analysis about what the Buckeyes were was accurate. Too many weapons. You're going to have a hard time stopping them. The one thing that you can cling to, if you're a Notre Dame fan, outside of all the positive vibes I mentioned at the beginning of the show with, for the first time in my lifetime, after a loss, you feel good about the state of the program with where Marcus Freeman is leading them, but they had a ton of injuries all along that secondary, all along the defensive line, and it carried them still to a national title game. Look, history does not remember second place, but you can cling to that aspect of an Irish team that wasn't at full strength, that a lot of people doubted. I know they wind up being on the wrong side of the spread, but if they could have just forced one stop, and that is the part you're talking about, playing the highlights back in your head, they have a chance to maybe go down and tie that game in a game that a lot of people thought was going to be, I think, a replay of 2013 where they're outmatched, they're outgunned, and it's 42-0 before you can even get your footing right. And that wasn't the case. They fought, they hung in there, and this is as good of a feeling I've had, if you can have that, after a loss about Notre Dame. All the stories my dad passed along to me of the pedigree and the championship history was a punchline for the better part of the last 25 years. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like even if people still hate, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you can put it in one ear and out the other about they don't belong, they're always given handouts. Like, they earned that trip to the title game, and they're in a good spot under Marcus Freeman to be a reminder they're among college football's elite.
They accomplished the almost impossible this year in the fact that they made me kind of like Notre Dame.
And they said that how many times pregame last night? Desmond Howard mentioned, like, man, I know so many people are texting me, I don't really like Notre Dame, but a lot of that had to do with Marcus Freeman. Like, I can't help it. I like this guy.
And then I think about the fact that the reason I like Notre Dame is because they're playing Ohio State, and I hate Ohio State, but I can't then like Marcus Freeman because he played at Ohio State.
It's a tough catch-22 there for you.
It is, right? By the way, hey, Jake, my coworker and I, see, I told you, we're sitting at our desks right now, and these questions keep us going. Greetings and thanks for being awesome from State Farm in Carmel. I should do ads for State Farm in Carmel. My name's Jake, for crying out loud, right?
Indeed.
I'll
just
even put on a red shirt.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever said that to me before when I tell them what my first name is. You got plays of the day, Jimmy?
Got some for you.
All right, we'll do them next.
Today's plays of the day, a good mix of college basketball and the NBA. We'll start first in college hoops. We'll take Texas to win the money line tonight as they host Missouri. A little bit earlier this evening, Purdue hosts Ohio State. I'll lay the 10 on the Boilermakers against the Buckeyes. Last play for you, Magic and Raptors in Toronto. Give me Orlando to win straight up. Eddie, any plays for you?
No, sir.
Those are your plays of the day.
As you guys know, I speak things into existence, right?
Generally, yeah.
15 minutes at most, 5 minutes after we had Scott Agnes on, the Pacers sent the following ex-post tweet. We are teaming with the Indiana Cafe in Paris to host watch parties at more than 25 locations for our games against the Spurs this week. Register at pacersinparis.com to be the first to receive each day's clue an hour before it goes live on social in Quest for Gold to find the Indiana cafes around Paris.
At the last line, does it say, thanks, Jake Query, for the idea? Is that any credit or not?
For real,
or anything
right?
there? I don't,
Stop it.
I'm just asking. Somebody's got to ask the tough questions, Eddie.
Stop it.
They are everywhere. I do have a picture of myself. I would think anybody from Indianapolis, when you're over there and you're like, there's an Indiana cafe, you get a picture of it, right?
Yeah.
The final AP top 25 of college football season is out. I always get a kick out of this when it's like a headline. Ohio State finishes as number one in the AP poll. Really? Okay. Shocker. Have you seen the poll, Jimmy?
I have not.
Would you like to guess where Indiana finishes? Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas, Penn State, your top five. Indiana is where?
13th.
They are 10th.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad I get a guess.
Okay, Eddie, how many teams that made the college football playoff ended up ranked behind Indiana?
I'll go with 2.
Those two would be?
I'll go ahead. No. Eddie can play solo.
SMU,
Okay.
Clemson,
And you believe that they would be ranked where?
behind Indiana.
Understood, but where? There are 15 spots behind Indiana.
I'm not sure.
SMU is 12th. Clemson is 14th.
Where'd Boise State finish?
8th. So the rest of the top 10, Georgia is 6th, Arizona State 7th, Boise State 8th, 9th is Tennessee, and 10th is Indiana. Well, how does Tennessee finish ahead of Indiana? They got their doors blown off, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, they did.
They were on Ohio State's path, yeah.
But they got absolutely demolished.
The rankings, end of season rankings always make me laugh. There's some moments where, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but you'll see the team that loses in the national championship game, if they get run, they'll fall to like 4th.
Yeah, exactly. And you're like, really?
So, yeah, it's a frivolous poll. It has as much weight as the way too early top 25 that everybody loves to put out
Frivolous.
seconds after
nice
the
job.
Thank
Nice
you.
word, Jimmy.
Seconds
The
after
three
the
teams
national title game.
without double-digit wins to finish the year ranked. SEC bias. Alabama, South Carolina, and then, of course, they had to include Deion. Colorado, 25th.
Had to.
That's Coach Prime, Jake.
That's right. That I'm telling you that when
Mr.
my
Coach
day
Prime.
comes, and I don't know that I go north as opposed to south, but when my day comes, if I meet my maker and I'm allowed 3 questions, one of them might be, yeah, I'm curious. Was there an edict that ESPN had to say Coach Prime for the first year that Deion Sanders was at Colorado? Because that first game that they were on national television, they said Coach Prime after every play. It was the most annoying thing known to man.
By the way, all the dreams of Army, Navy, and that game being in the same conference involving implications of the college football playoff. Army finishes 21st. Navy also receiving votes, 55 votes their way.
Navy, man, that thing, they took
Yeah.
on water once they lost, right?
They have. Well done.
JMV has arrived.
Did you guys like the Village People song?
I love that song, actually.
From the album Go West.
I thought, and do you know that the lead singer of the Village People back then, the Village People now that you
Yeah.
see are totally different than,
Completely
than
different,
those
yeah.
Village People. But the Village People back then, the lead singer, and I think he was a cop,
His
wasn't
name was
Like,
Victor something.
You know who he married? You know who he
Debbie
was married
Allen?
to? At the time that Village People, like YMCA and all that, he was married to, I don't know what her.
I thought it was Debbie Allen of fame.
Felicia Rashad.
Yeah, Felicia Rashad.
Now, and
Pretty close. Yeah.
was he which outfit was he, or did he rotate?
He was the cop.
I thought
The
maybe
lead singer was the cop, Victor or whatever his name
yeah,
is.
okay.
Yeah.
But when they did the video for In the Navy, he was a sailor, right? Or he was
Was he?
he was a naval officer because they were all like
Yeah.
in the Navy. Now the The Native American fellow, the Indian in Village People, was just like the rest. I believe the
Random
rest
guy
of
off
the
the street.
band. Correct. He was a guy that
Well,
was
yeah,
like
you had to have somebody.
he was
that
a dancer,
would be
right?
good with the
Right.
shirt off and stuff. And the construction worker always had that screwdriver in his teeth.
Oh yeah. go figure, right?
Nah, man, the Village People, that was a big deal back then. So,
Macho Man, My Roommate, YMCA. They had some hits.
that is
All
some
right,
good stuff.
John, what's on the big program today?
We're going to do, we do Greg every Tuesday, Greg Rakestraw, Rayfeld Davis, former Boilermaker, Big Ten Network. We do have Dusty May and Chad Buchanan is going to join me from Paris tomorrow. Dusty May, Michigan does not play again this week until Friday when they get Matt Painter and Purdue at Mac Arena in West Lafayette. So we'll find out what Dusty May's wife's sister lives right next to my mom.
That's his sister-in-law, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
His sister-in-law and their daughter goes down, and I think my mom likes their daughter Viv more than she likes me. So Viv's down there all the time, and then Dustin, her husband, clears my mom's driveway from the snow.
Well,
and
that's
stuff
cool.
all the time. Yep. So
Well, I mean, I
and
know
then
the
they all
feeling.
end up going to Michigan games. Yeah.
My girlfriend likes you more than she likes me,
Yes,
so I know the feeling, John. Right?
I let that go. I'm glad you brought it up.
Jimmy, how you doing, buddy?
Doing all right,
Everything
John.
okay?
I'm doing okay. They showed some backbone last night
I
at the end.
thought when they did that field goal thing with Jeter and that clown show, I thought, yeah, that's where
You
it
should get
kinda
4 points
ended.
for hitting the upright.
Like he did, like right in the crosshairs, hit it too. I don't know if you could hit that thing any harder than
I
that.
know.
I mean,
You should get 4 points for
Couldn't
it.
get a stop. Get a
All
stop
right.
late, you have a chance.
Speaking
What
of
are you gonna
stop, Eddie's telling you to do exactly that
Way
because
to
he's
go,
now
Eddie.
sitting here doing circular gyrations to tell us to wrap.
Paris today?
We did.
Did you?
We did. I asked if he was at the Super 8, and he got super offended. So, yes. But we did have him. John's up next. We're back with you at noon tomorrow, and we thank you for listening to Query & Company.